There is a moment buried deep in the collective memory of humanity, a moment when the sky itself was not a ceiling but a battlefield, when the ground beneath our ancestors' feet trembled not with earthquake or storm, but with the footsteps of gods and monsters locked in a war that would define creation itself. These were not mere stories told around fires to pass the cold nights. They were the foundational dramas through which ancient peoples made sense of a terrifying and magnificent world, a world where humanity was often caught in the crossfire of forces far beyond its control. What if these myths were more than just legends? What if they were the echoes of real events, real struggles, and real civilizations whose lives were forever altered by the cosmic wars unfolding above them? This is the mystery we are about to explore together, when gods waged war with monsters and the forgotten civilizations caught in between. From the floodplains of Mesopotamia to the high temples of the Maya, from the icy realms of the Norse to the sun-scorched deserts of Egypt, culture after culture told versions of the same unbelievable story: gods battling primordial beasts, shaping the world through conflict, and demanding humanity's participation in a struggle between order and chaos. These narratives were so much more than entertainment. They were maps of meaning, frameworks for survival, and mirrors reflecting the deepest fears and highest hopes of societies living on the edge of oblivion. We are going to journey across time and space, piecing together clues from archaeology, ancient texts, and cultural memory to uncover how these epic tales of divine conflict shaped the destiny of humankind. You will discover how a volcanic eruption might have inspired a myth, how a dying king's reign was interpreted as a god's defeat, and how rituals performed thousands of years ago were desperate attempts to keep the cosmos from collapsing. This is not just a story about gods and monsters. It is a story about us, about resilience, about the human need to find order in chaos and purpose in the face of the unknown. So settle in, open your imagination, and prepare to see mythology in a completely new light, not as fiction, but as the living memory of civilizations that stared into the abyss and told a story so powerful, we are still listening millennia later. Picture the very first moments of a universe not yet formed, a swirling, roaring chaos of unimaginable power. From this primordial soup, countless cultures envisioned the birth of their gods, not through quiet meditation, but through cataclysmic, universe-shaping violence. This was the cosmic battlefield, the foundational stage upon which every civilization built its understanding of existence. It wasn't merely about good versus evil in a simple sense. It was about the very imposition of order onto the formless void, of structure conquering chaos, of light emerging from an abyss that constantly threatened to reclaim it. These stories were the operating manuals for reality itself, explaining why the world works the way it does and what terrifying forces must be kept at bay for it to continue. In the Babylonian epic, the Enuma Elish, we witness this drama unfold with breathtaking scale. The goddess Tiamat, who represents the saltwater ocean, and her consort Apsu, the freshwater abyss, are the first beings. But their rest is disturbed by the younger, more energetic gods they created. What follows is a war for the ages. Tiamat, grieving and enraged, transforms into a monstrous dragon, a personification of pure, undiluted chaos. She creates an army of terrifying creatures: venomous serpents, sharp-toothed dragons, storm demons, scorpion men, and merfolk, all poised to unmake creation. To confront her, the gods elevate Marduk, a younger god of thunder and storms, promising him kingship if he succeeds. Their battle is epic beyond measure. Marduk, armed with winds and a net, rides his storm chariot into the fray. He inflates Tiamat with the winds, shoots an arrow that splits her heart, and literally cleaves her body in two. From one half, he creates the dome of the sky, from the other, the foundation of the earth. Her roaring, chaotic waters are tamed and organized into the rivers Tigris and Euphrates. This wasn't just a victory, it was an act of cosmic architecture, using the corpse of chaos itself to build the ordered world. Now, travel north to the frozen worlds of Norse mythology. Here, the threat is not a primordial mother goddess, but a cold, indifferent entropy embodied by the Jötnar, often mistranslated as giants but better understood as primeval forces of nature and destruction. The most famous monster is Jörmungandr, the Midgard serpent, a creature so vast it encircles the entire world and bites its own tail. Its eternal adversary is Thor, the god of thunder and protector of humanity. Their relationship is one of mutual, inevitable hatred. In one famous tale, Thor goes fishing, baiting his hook with an ox head, and succeeds in hooking the serpent. The two engage in a terrifying tug of war, a struggle so potent it causes the very oceans to churn and the sky to tremble. Thor nearly pulls the monster onto the boat, poised to strike the killing blow with his hammer, Mjolnir, when his fishing companion, terrified, cuts the line. This moment is not a failure but a postponement. Both know their final battle is destined for Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods, where they will finally kill each other, their conflict ending only with the end of all things. This narrative accepts destruction as an inevitable part of the cycle, a price that must be paid. So why do these stories, separated by continents and centuries, share such a strikingly similar core? Scholars like Joseph Campbell saw them as expressions of the monomyth, the hero's journey, where a champion faces a great darkness on behalf of the community. But the meaning runs even deeper. On one level, these are personified explanations of nature. Tiamat's defeat is a mythologized account of how ancient peoples witnessed the unpredictable, often violent Tigris and Euphrates rivers being tamed by irrigation and agriculture, human order imposed on natural chaos. Thor's battles with Jörmungandr could symbolize the struggle against the harsh, unpredictable North Sea, where a sudden storm could mean death, and the hope that divine strength could keep those chaotic waves at bay. On another level, these are profound psychological archetypes. The monster represents everything we fear, the unknown, the uncontrollable, the parts of ourselves and our world that are wild and destructive. The god represents our highest aspirations, order, courage, protection, and the will to create meaning. Every time a parent assures a child that the monster under the bed isn't real, they are engaging in this ancient cosmic battle. Every time a society builds a levee against a flood or a law against chaos, they are reenacting Marduk's victory. These myths validate social structures by placing the king or priest as the human representative of the victorious god, the one responsible for maintaining the hard-won order against the ever-present threat of a return to chaos. They provide a moral framework, teaching that struggle against overwhelming odds is noble and necessary, and that courage in the face of certain doom, like that of the Norse gods, is the highest virtue. This universal recurrence points to a fundamental human experience. Our ancient ancestors lived in a world far more immediate and threatening than our own. A drought wasn't a weather pattern, it was the sun god turning his back. A flood wasn't a natural disaster, it was the water dragon breaking free from its divine chains. An eclipse was a demon swallowing the sun. These myths were the tools they used to process the trauma of existing in a world where famine, disease, and natural catastrophe could wipe out a community without warning. By framing these events as part of a larger cosmic war, they gave them meaning. It wasn't random cruelty, it was a battle they could understand, and more importantly, one they could influence through prayer, ritual, and right living. This framework leads us to a compelling and haunting question: which real, flesh and blood civilizations first wrote these stories down? Who were the people who looked at the terrifying power of nature and saw, not mindless force, but a narrative of divine conflict in which they themselves were playing a part? To understand how these cosmic battles became woven into the very fabric of human civilization, we must travel back to the very beginning of recorded history, to the muddy floodplains between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Here, the Sumerians built the world's first cities, and with them, they created the first detailed written accounts of gods at war with monsters. For them, this was not abstract mythology. It was a direct reflection of their daily reality. Their entire world was a precarious island of order, carved out by backbreaking labor from the unpredictable, often violent chaos of nature. Every spring, they watched the rivers swell with meltwater from distant mountains, threatening to wipe their fields and cities from the map with devastating floods. Every summer, they feared the scorching sun that could bake their earth to dust and bring famine. It is no wonder that in their stories, creation itself was a violent act of subduing a watery, chaotic monster. Their most foundational text, the Enuma Elish, is far more than a simple creation myth. It is a cosmological drama and a political document rolled into one. As we heard earlier, it tells of the god Marduk's epic battle against the primordial dragon Tiamat. But the Sumerians didn't just tell this story for entertainment around the fire. They inscribed it on clay tablets and recited it during the most important New Year festival, the Akitu. This annual ritual was a reenactment of Marduk's victory, a crucial ceremony to symbolically renew the cosmic order for another year and ensure the continuity of their world. The king's role in this ritual was vital. His legitimacy to rule was directly tied to his function as the human representative of the victorious god, the one responsible for maintaining that hard-won order against the ever-present threat of chaos. The story explained why their world existed and, more importantly, what they had to do to keep it from collapsing back into the void. This theme of confronting monstrous forces wasn't confined to the cosmic scale. It permeated their most famous literary work, the Epic of Gilgamesh. When the king Gilgamesh and his friend Enkidu journey to the distant cedar forest to slay the giant demon Humbaba, they are not merely on a monster hunt. Humbaba is appointed by the gods themselves as the guardian of the forest, a terrifying creature whose face is a labyrinth of intestines, whose roar is a flood, whose mouth is fire, and whose breath is death. He is the embodiment of untamed, chaotic nature. By challenging and ultimately killing him, Gilgamesh is performing a very Sumerian act, imposing human will and order onto the wild, dangerous unknown. Yet the story is nuanced. This victory against chaos comes at a terrible cost, as the gods punish Enkidu with death for his role in the slaying, teaching that even necessary victories against monstrous forces can have profound and tragic consequences. We know these stories were central to Sumerian identity because of what they left behind. The archaeological remains of their great city-states like Uruk, and Eridu are dominated by massive temple complexes called ziggurats. These towering, stepped pyramids were not just places of worship, they were literal bridges between heaven and earth, the axis mundi where the divine and human realms met. The architecture itself suggests a constant preoccupation with the cosmic struggle. The temples were often dedicated to specific gods associated with order and creation, serving as monumental bulwarks against the forces of chaos. Artifacts found within cylinder seals, votive statues, and relief carvings repeatedly depict scenes of heroes and gods battling hybrid creatures and beasts, indicating that this narrative was ever present in their art and ritual. The Sumerian genius was in their invention of cuneiform writing. which allowed them to meticulously record these conflicts on clay tablets that survived the millennia. This gives us an incredible window into their worldview. We see how they interpreted real environmental catastrophes, a sudden shift in the river's course, a failed harvest, a devastating disease, through the lens of their mythology. A flood wasn't just a flood, it was Tiamat stirring in her slumber, a momentary resurgence of the primordial chaos that Marduk had defeated. A drought was the sun god's anger. This framework provided them with a response, intensified ritual, prayer, and correct action to help the forces of order reassert their dominance. The Sumerians, therefore, give us the first clear blueprint of a pattern we will see across the globe. They show us how a civilization uses the narrative of gods versus monsters to explain their environment, validate their social structure, and develop a psychological framework for resilience in the face of an unpredictable and often terrifying world. While the Sumerians saw their cosmic battles as foundational events from the distant past, the ancient Egyptians lived theirs every single day. Their entire existence was predicated on a terrifyingly beautiful truth that the universe required constant maintenance and that the gods needed human help to keep the forces of darkness at bay. No story captures this delicate balance more powerfully than the eternal struggle between the sun god Ra and his archenemy, the colossal serpent of chaos, Apophis. Each evening, as the sun set in the west, Egyptians believed Ra did not simply rest. He entered the Juat, the perilous underworld, to begin a 12-hour nocturnal journey in his solar bark. This was no peaceful cruise, it was a nightly war zone. Apophis, the embodiment of Isfet chaos, disorder, and evil, would lie in wait, seeking to devour Ra and his crew of lesser gods, plunging the world into eternal darkness. The battle was fierce and relentless, and its outcome was never guaranteed. Only through the combined magic of protective deities like Seth, who stood at the prow to spear the serpent, and the goddess Serpent, who used her scorpion venom to subdue him, could Ra wound Apophis enough to escape his coils and emerge victorious at dawn, reborn as the scarab beetle god Khepri. This was not a one-time event but a cycle repeated every 24 hours, making the sunrise the most profound and relief-filled moment in the Egyptian world, a visible sign that order had once again triumphed. This dramatic mythology was not born in a vacuum. It was a direct reflection of Egypt's precarious and perfect geography. Their civilization was a thin, green ribbon of life, the Black Land or Kemet snaking through the vast, deadly red land of desert, which they saw as the physical manifestation of Apophis himself. Their survival depended entirely on the Nile's predictable, annual inundation. Too little flood meant famine and drought, too much meant destructive, village-sweeping chaos. The sun, too, was a double-edged sword. Its daily return was essential for life, but its scorching summer heat could wither crops and bring death. The myth of Ra and Apophis perfectly encapsulated this existential tension. The orderly, life-giving sun and Nile were the principle of truth, balance, and cosmic order. Apophis was everything that threatened it. The daily solar cycle mirrored the annual Nile cycle, a constant, fragile struggle to maintain balance against the ever-encroaching void. Understanding that their fate was directly tied to the outcome of this cosmic war, the Egyptians did not merely pray and hope. They actively participated in the battle through an elaborate system of state-sponsored magic and ritual. This was humanity's role in the universe, to be the god support system. In temples across Egypt, priests performed daily rituals not just to honor the gods, but to actively empower them. They would clean, dress, and feed the god statue, believing these actions sustained the deity's strength for the ongoing fight. One of the most vivid and public ceremonies was the breaking of the red pots. During this ritual, priests and sometimes even the pharaoh would smash pottery painted with the names of enemies or symbols of chaos, often red to represent the evil god Seth. Each shattering pot was a symbolic blow against Apophis, a magical act that weakened the serpent in the underworld and strengthened Ra for his nightly ordeal. They believed their rituals in the mortal realm had a direct, tangible impact on the celestial battlefield. This interconnected world meant that any disruption in the natural world was a cause for grave theological concern. When the Nile failed to flood properly, or when it flooded too destructively, it wasn't just a bad year for farming. It was a sign that Apophis was gaining the upper hand. Historical records from the reign of Pepi Roman II, one of Egypt's longest ruling pharaohs toward the end of the Old Kingdom, hint at this. As his reign progressed, evidence suggests the Nile's inundation became less reliable. The priests would have interpreted this not as a climatic shift, but as a cosmic emergency. It meant Apophis was wounding Ra, that the serpent's chaos was leaking into the ordered world. The response was not to build better irrigation systems, but to double down on the ritual warfare. More offerings, more ceremonies, more magic, a desperate, collective effort by the entire civilization to rally behind their god and push back the darkness. The eventual collapse of the Old Kingdom into famine and social disorder would have been seen as the ultimate theological catastrophe, the night when Apophis finally won, if only temporarily. The sophisticated genius of the Egyptian system was its ability to provide both an explanation for suffering and a prescribed method of action, turning passive fear into active, ritualized resistance against the chaos of the universe. Now we journey across the Mediterranean to an island civilization whose relationship with the monstrous was not one of simple opposition, but of dangerous intimacy and ritual mastery. On the sun-drenched island of Crete, the Minoans built a society so unique that it still captivates us today, a culture that did not see the bull as a mere monster to be slain, but as a powerful, ambivalent force to be confronted, harnessed, and perhaps even incorporated. Their central mythological figure, the Minotaur, is not a straightforward symbol of evil chaos. It is a complex hybrid, born of human transgression and divine punishment, confined at the heart of a labyrinth, a structure that is itself a masterpiece of both order and confusion. This was a civilization that danced with the bull, both literally and metaphorically, and their story offers a radically different perspective on the ancient dialogue between humanity and the monstrous. The archaeological heart of this mystery is the vast palace complex of Knossos. Unlike the defensive fortresses of the mainland Mycenaeans, Knossos feels like an open, intricate maze of courtyards, storerooms, and ceremonial chambers, a place designed for processions and rituals rather than for war. Walking through its reconstructed corridors, one is immediately struck by the art. The walls are alive with fluid, dynamic frescoes depicting young men and women engaged in what appears to be bull leaping, a breathtakingly dangerous acrobatic feat where an athlete would literally vault over the charging horns of a bull. This was not a blood sport. It was a ritual performance, a display of human courage and agility pitted against raw, untamed animal power. The bull was not an enemy to be destroyed from a distance, but a force to be met head-on, respected, and overcome through skill and grace. This art suggests the Minoans saw their relationship with chaotic natural forces not as a war of annihilation, but as a perilous, sacred game with strict rules. This brings us to their most enduring legend, a story filtered through later Greek tellings but rooted in Minoan symbolism, the myth of the Minotaur. The creature itself, Asterion, is a hybrid half-man, half-bull. Its very existence is the result of a broken sacred trust, born from Queen Pasiphae's unnatural desire for a bull sent by the god Poseidon. It is a monster born from the blurring of boundaries between human, divine, and animal. Its home is the labyrinth designed by the genius Daedalus. The labyrinth is the ultimate symbol of Minoan complexity. It is a place of perfect mathematical order from above, but of utter confusion and existential terror from within. It represents the Minoan understanding of the cosmos itself, beautifully ordered on a divine level, but terrifying and unpredictable for those trapped inside its patterns. The Minotaur at its center is the chaotic prize, the dark secret at the heart of a seemingly perfect structure. The legend takes a darker turn with the tribute demanded from Athens, 7 young men and 7 young women to be sent into the labyrinth as sacrifices. This grisly detail, likely a later Greek invention to cast their rivals in a sinister light, may nonetheless echo a kernel of Minoan truth. It suggests a civilization so powerful that it could demand human payment from its neighbors, a society that possibly practiced rituals so intense they involved the symbolic, or perhaps very real confrontation with death in the form of the bull. The Minoans may have believed that to maintain their sophisticated, peaceful world, a terrible price occasionally had to be paid to the monstrous forces that underpinned reality. The hero Theseus's slaying of the Minotaur, then, represents not just a victory, but an outside force imposing a simpler, more black and white morality onto a culture that comfortable with complexity and ambiguity. Then, around the year 1600 BC, the unthinkable happened. Thera, a volcanic island 70 miles north of Crete, exploded in one of the most catastrophic eruptions in human history. The event was apocalyptic. It would have been heard across the entire Mediterranean. Tsunamis hundreds of feet high would have ravaged the northern coast of Crete, wiping out its vital fleet and coastal towns. Earthquakes would have shattered its proud palaces. The sky would have darkened for weeks, choking the island in a blanket of suffocating ash that poisoned the fields and blotted out the sun. For the Minoans, this was not a natural disaster, it was a cosmological event. The sea, their source of life and trade, had suddenly risen up to destroy them. The earth itself had roared and cracked open. The sun, so central to their vibrant art, had been extinguished by a great blackness from the north. We can only imagine how the Minoan priests and people interpreted this catastrophe through their existing worldview. The bull was a central symbol of seismic power. Its bellowing was associated with earthquakes. Did they believe they had somehow failed in their ritual duties? Had the monstrous force they had so carefully managed in their ceremonies finally broken free of its labyrinthine constraints? Was the eruption the fury of their bull god unleashed upon them? The event did not destroy Minoan civilization outright, but it shattered its power and confidence irreparably. It left them vulnerable, and within a couple of centuries, their palaces were occupied by the more militaristic Mycenaeans from mainland Greece. The sophisticated, nuanced Minoan way of conceptualizing order and chaos, through ritual dance and architectural complexity, was ultimately overwritten by a worldview that preferred heroes who simply slew the monster. The Minoans remind us that not every civilization saw the cosmic battle in the same way. Some sought to build labyrinths around the chaos, to perform a graceful, deadly dance with it, believing that the monster could be contained but never truly destroyed. Far to the north of Egypt and Crete, in the rugged highlands of Anatolia, another mighty empire was building its own mythic fortress against the encroaching dark. The Hittites, masters of empire and meticulous record keepers, did not see the cosmic battle as a daily solar journey or a labyrinthine dance. For them, it was a foundational drama of raw, elemental power, centered on their supreme deity, the storm god Tahana, whose voice was the thunder and whose weapon was the lightning bolt. Theirs was a mythology of direct, visceral confrontation, and they left behind one of the most detailed and fascinating accounts of how a state could weaponize a divine narrative for both spiritual and political survival. At the heart of Hittite cosmic lore was the epic battle between Tahana and Illuyanka, a gigantic serpentine dragon. The myth, preserved on clay tablets in the vast archives of their capital Hattusa, unfolds in 2 gripping acts. In the first, the dragon surprisingly defeats the storm god, humiliating him and stealing his heart and eyes, the very sources of his divine power. A weakened and despondent Tahana must then seek help from a mortal woman and her son. The son eventually marries the dragon's daughter and, as a wedding gift, asks for the return of Tahana's stolen organs. Once restored, the storm god immediately challenges Illuyanka to a rematch. But as they fight to a standstill, the mortal son cries out to his father-in-law, the dragon, "Watch out, I will help Tahana." Distracted at the crucial moment, Illuyanka is beheaded by the storm god. The twist is profoundly dark. Tahana then turns to his human savior and says, "You too must die," and kills him as well. This was not a simple tale of good triumphing over evil. It was a complex narrative about the high cost of order, the necessary betrayal of kinship ties for the greater cosmic good, and the idea that humanity might be both the essential ally and the ultimate sacrifice in the gods' eternal war. This was not a story to be merely read. It was a reality to be ritually relived. Each year, the Hittites celebrated the Purhuli festival, a sprawling state ceremony that reenacted Tahana's victory over the dragon. The entire community would participate in a grand performance that included recitations of the myth, offerings to the gods, and almost certainly a symbolic slaying of the serpent. This was not mere theater. It was a crucial piece of national security. The ritual was believed to magically replenish the storm god's strength, ensuring his continued dominance over the forces of chaos, which in turn guaranteed the fertility of the land, the success of the harvest, and the stability of the kingdom for another year. The festival was a massive undertaking directed by the king and his high priests, blending religious fervor with political pageantry to reinforce the social order and demonstrate the ruler's unique role as the chief intermediary between the divine battlefield and the human realm. The Hittites were brilliant pragmatists, and they quickly learned to export their mythological framework to the arena of international politics. Their extensive library of state treaties shows how they used the imagery of divine battle to legitimize their power and cement alliances. When a weaker kingdom swore allegiance to the Hittite emperor, the treaty document would often invoke the gods as witnesses, casting any potential betrayal not just as a political crime, but as an act of cosmic rebellion akin to Illuyanka's challenge. Conversely, when they negotiated as equals with other great powers like Egypt, famously resulting in the peace treaty after the Battle of Kadesh, the language framed their coexistence as a joint effort by two legitimate, God-approved rulers to maintain order against the shared chaotic threats on their borders. Mythology became a tool of diplomacy, a shared language of power that could be used to threaten vassals or reassure allies. This sophisticated worldview was about to face its ultimate test. In the late 12th century BC, the civilized world of the Mediterranean was utterly shattered by a cascade of disasters we now call the Bronze Age collapse. Palaces were burned, cities were abandoned, trade routes disintegrated, and literacy itself nearly vanished. Among the mysterious catalysts for this apocalyptic period were the raids of the so-called Sea Peoples, confederations of marauders who attacked by ship and by land, leaving a trail of destruction from Greece to the Levant. The Hittite Empire, once a colossus, was one of their primary targets, and it fell completely, its great capital Hattusa reduced to smoldering ruins. We can only imagine the desperate theological calculations happening in the final days. As reports flooded in of unknown armies burning coastal cities, the Hittite priests and the king would not have seen this as a simple military invasion. Through the lens of their deepest beliefs, this was the myth made terrifyingly real. The Sea Peoples were not merely human enemies, they were the literal embodiment of chaos, a monstrous, faceless horde erupting from the unpredictable sea, the very domain of chaos in ancient thought, to challenge the established order. They were the living incarnation of Illuyanka and his army, and their victory meant that despite all their rituals, all their prayers, and all their meticulous treaty-making, the storm god had finally been defeated. The cosmic balance had tipped, and the world they knew was being unmade. The Hittite tablets fall silent, but their mythology gives us a heartbreaking insight into how a great civilization might have interpreted its own catastrophic end, not as a historical event, but as the final, losing chapter in the story of their god's eternal war. Leaving the smoldering ruins of the Hittite Empire, we now voyage across the Atlantic to a civilization whose understanding of cosmic conflict was so precise, so mathematically intricate, that they encoded it into the very movements of the stars. For the Maya, the battle between order and chaos was not a singular event from a forgotten past, but a continuous, cyclical drama playing out across multiple planes of existence in the heavens above, in the fragile rainforest ecosystems around them, and within the blood-filled rituals of their royal courts. Theirs was a universe in perpetual, precarious balance, and humanity's role was to actively participate in its maintenance through a sophisticated fusion of astronomy, storytelling, and statecraft. The foundational text of this worldview is the Popol Vuh, the Maya's great book of creation. Unlike the straightforward victories of a Marduk or a Tahana, the Maya Genesis story is a tale of trial, error, and divine perseverance. The gods' first attempts at creating beings to worship them are catastrophic failures. They fashion creatures of mud that simply dissolve into nothingness. Next, they carve people from wood, but these soulless, ungrateful mannequins prove to be arrogant and forgetful of their creators, and are ultimately destroyed in a great flood, their descendants becoming the monkeys that chatter in the trees. The world is then plagued by the arrogant, monstrous sons of the underworld, Seven Makor and his 2 sons, who falsely claim the glory of the sun and moon for themselves. Their vanity and deception cast a shadow over the nascent creation, a chaotic lie that must be cleansed before true humanity can emerge. The hero twins, Hunahpu and Exbalanque, descend into the dark, labyrinthine realm of Xibalba to confront these forces of arrogance and disorder. Through cleverness, courage, and trickery, they outwit the death gods, defeat the monstrous pretenders, and ultimately lay the groundwork for the final, successful creation of humanity from sacred maize. This was not a simple creation myth. It was a narrative that established humility, cleverness, and reverence as the essential qualities for survival in a cosmos where chaos was not just an external monster, but a potential failure within creation itself. This epic was far more than a sacred story. It was a script written in the sky. The Maya were arguably the most accomplished astronomers of the ancient world, and they meticulously mapped the cycles of celestial bodies, believing them to be the visible expression of the gods' ongoing struggles. The planet Venus, in particular, held immense significance as a celestial embodiment of war and conflict. They tracked its complex 584-day cycle with astonishing precision, knowing exactly when it would appear as the morning star and when it would vanish as the evening star. These transitions were not seen as neutral astronomical events. The heliacal rising of Venus as the morning star was interpreted as a moment of celestial aggression, a time when the cosmic war flared up, making it an auspicious, if dangerous, time to launch military campaigns. Kings would literally time their raids to coincide with these celestial portents, believing they were riding a wave of divine energy, aligning their earthly battles with the greater cosmic one happening overhead. Astronomy was not a science separate from religion. It was the art of reading the battlefield reports from the gods' war against darkness. This profound connection between myth and cosmos is set in stone at their great city-states. The towering temples of Tikal, piercing the green canopy of the rainforest, and the intricately carved hieroglyphic stairways of Kapon are covered in depictions of this eternal struggle. One of the most common motifs is the image of a king dressed as a god, often wielding a double-headed serpent. This profound connection between myth and cosmos is set in stone at their great city-states. The towering temples of Tikal, piercing the green canopy of the rainforest, and the intricately carved hieroglyphic stairways of Kapon are covered in depictions of this eternal struggle. One of the most common motifs is the image of a king dressed as a god, often wielding a double-headed serpent standing triumphantly over a cowering, grotesque figure. This figure is the Wits, the mountain monster, a personification of the wild, untamed earth. By depicting themselves subduing this chaos monster, Maya rulers were making a powerful statement. They were not just political leaders, they were the human agents of cosmic order, the ones responsible for replicating the gods' primordial victory over chaos and ensuring that the ordered world of the city, with its maze fields and calendar rituals, continued to exist within the ever-encroaching, chaotic wilderness of the jungle. This responsibility became terrifyingly concrete during times of crisis, when a severe drought gripped the Maya world, as paleoclimatologists have proven happened with devastating frequency. It was not merely a weather pattern. It was a sign that the cosmic balance had been lost, that the forces of chaos embodied by drought demons and the death gods of Xibalba were gaining the upper hand. The response was not passive despair, but a dramatic intensification of ritual. The king, as the axis mundi between worlds, would perform a bloodletting ceremony of profound intensity. In the main plaza, before his gathered people, he would pierce his own tongue or genitals, drawing forth blood to be burned as precious smoke, a literal life force offering to the weary gods. This was not self-harm. It was a strategic transfusion of vital energy from the human realm to the divine. It was the king reenacting the sacrifice of the hero twins in the underworld, using his own body as the battlefield to strengthen the gods in their fight and coax the life-giving rains back from the chaotic void. The survival of the entire world literally depended on the success of this ritual warfare waged by its human stewards. While the Maya sought to maintain cosmic balance through precise ritual and astronomy, far to the north, another civilization developed a mythology that did not seek to prevent the end, but to meet it with eyes wide open and weapons held high. The Norse worldview was forged in the crucible of a breathtakingly harsh environment, a land of interminable winters, volcanic barrens, and treacherous, storm-racked seas. Theirs was not a story of maintaining a delicate equilibrium, but of a glorious, doomed resistance against forces so vast that even the gods themselves were destined to fall. This was not a mythology of hope for permanent victory, but one that found profound meaning in the courage displayed in the face of certain annihilation. The centerpiece of this entire cosmological drama is Ragnarök, the twilight of the gods. This is not a vague apocalypse, but a meticulously detailed, prophesied sequence of events. It begins with Fimbulwinter, 3 consecutive winters with no summer in between, plunging the world into an ice-locked darkness. This cold snap shatters all bonds of kinship and law, as humanity descends into a brutal war of all against all. The earth itself trembles so violently that the great wolf Fenrir breaks free from his magical bonds, and his father, the trickster Loki, leads an army of the dead from the underworld on a ship built from the fingernails of the deceased. From the east, the fire giants march, and from the south, the frost giants advance, all converging on the divine battlefield of Vigrid. This is the ultimate mustering of every chaotic force in the cosmos, and the gods, knowing their fate is sealed, nonetheless arm themselves for the final stand. The individual battles of Ragnarök are not random skirmishes but deeply personal, fated duels that represent the culmination of ancient rivalries. The All-Father Odin, the seeker of wisdom, rides to meet the wolf Fenrir, the embodiment of chaos that he has tried to bind and outsmart for ages. In the end, his vast knowledge is no match for primordial fury, and the wolf devours him. Thor, the steadfast protector of humanity and the champion of order, faces his eternal nemesis, the Midgard serpent Jörmungandr. He finally slays the monstrous worm that encircles the world, but as it thrashes in its death throes, it covers him in so much venom that he stumbles 9 steps and falls dead himself. The god Heimdall, the ever-vigilant watchman, and the treacherous Loki, the architect of this chaos, slay each other in a bitter struggle. Even the radiant sun god Freyr, who had given his magical sword for love, fights valiantly but falls defenseless before the fire giant Surtur. In the end, there are no victors. The stars fall from the sky, the earth sinks into the sea, and a consuming fire sweeps across the universe, leaving only silence and void. Yet from this total annihilation, a new world emerges. The earth rises again from the water, green and fertile. A new sun, the daughter of the old one, warms the land. A handful of gods survive, including Odin's son Vidar and Thor's sons Modi and Magni, who inherit their father's mighty hammer. Even 2 humans, sheltered in the world tree Yggdrasil, repopulate the earth. This cyclical nature of destruction and rebirth is the crucial, often overlooked element of the Norse apocalypse. It is not an end, but a reset, a necessary purification by fire and ice that clears away the old, flawed world to make way for a new and better one. This belief transformed their fatalism into a strange, powerful form of optimism. The struggle had meaning not because you could win, but because your courage in the struggle directly influenced the quality of what came after. This mythological framework was a direct reflection of their lived reality. The Vikings were masters of navigating some of the most dangerous waters on Earth. A sudden storm in the North Atlantic was not just bad weather, it was a glimpse of the Midgard serpent stirring in the depths. The volcanic eruptions of Iceland, with their rivers of fire and choking ash clouds, were the breath of the fire giants and a preview of Surtur's final conflagration. The seemingly endless winters of Scandinavia were annual rehearsals for Fimbulwinter. By mythologizing these terrifying natural phenomena, the Norse did not diminish their power, they gave them a narrative. A sailor facing a storm wasn't just a man about to drown. He was Thor upon the waves, doing battle with the world serpent. This provided a psychological template for confronting overwhelming adversity, not with the hope of survival, but with the goal of meeting one's fate with honor and courage, thereby earning a place in the songs that would be sung in the great hall of the next world. This acceptance of inevitable cycles of loss and renewal fundamentally shaped Norse culture. It fueled their incredible spirit of exploration and adaptation. Why fear sailing into the unknown if the entire world was destined to be swallowed by the sea anyway? Why not settle in the harsh, volcanic landscape of Iceland or the frozen shores of Greenland if you believed that a beautiful new world would always eventually rise from the ashes of the old? Their mythology did not encourage passive resignation. It instilled a proactive courage to face the most daunting challenges head-on, to trade and raid and explore with a ferocity that stunned their contemporaries. They understood that all things gods, monsters, and humans alike were bound by the same inevitable fate. And in that shared destiny, they found not despair, but the ultimate reason to live a life of extraordinary bravery, ensuring that when their own personal Ragnarök came, they would face it not with a whimper, but with a roar that would echo into the reborn world. Moving from the dramatic, prophesied doom of the Norse world, we now turn to a civilization shrouded in an almost complete and haunting silence. The Indus Valley, or Harappan, civilization presents us with a profound enigma. Flourishing for centuries across what is now Pakistan and northwest India, they built one of the most extensive and sophisticated urban societies of the ancient world, yet they left behind no deciphered texts, no grand royal inscriptions, no epic poems we can read. Their voice is lost to us, their stories muted, but if we listen closely to the whispers from their archaeology, we can discern the faintest echoes of a familiar theme, a people almost certainly grappling with their own understanding of order and chaos, perhaps through myths of divine beings and monstrous forces that we can only partially reconstruct from the artifacts they left behind. Our most tantalizing clues come from thousands of small, intricately carved stone seals. These were likely used for stamping trade goods, but they also served as a canvas for their beliefs. One of the most famous and debated seals depicts a figure seated in a clear yogic posture, legs crossed and heels pressed together. This central character has a horned headdress and is surrounded by various animals: a tiger, an elephant, a rhinoceros, and a buffalo. Some scholars interpret this as a proto-Shiva figure, an early version of the Hindu god who is later known as the Lord of Yoga and the tamer of wild forces. Even more suggestive are seals that show this horned figure confronting a serpentine creature or standing triumphantly between two tigers. These images powerfully recall the motifs we've seen across other cultures: a powerful, perhaps divine, being asserting mastery over the untamed and potentially dangerous forces of the natural world. It is a silent snapshot of what was almost certainly a rich mythological narrative about control, power, and the struggle to impose human meaning on a chaotic universe. This potential mythological framework finds a stunning parallel in their physical world. The Indus Valley civilization was a masterpiece of urban order. Their great cities like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa were marvels of prehistoric planning. They were built on a strict grid system with wide, straight streets, a level of organization unmatched elsewhere at the time. They constructed sophisticated, covered drainage systems that ran throughout the cities, managing waste and water with an efficiency that would not be seen again for millennia. Their bricks were standardized to a perfect ratio, identical across hundreds of miles of territory. This was not haphazard development. This was a society obsessed with imposing a breathtaking, almost mathematical order on their environment. This monumental urban project can be seen as a physical manifestation of a cosmic worldview. Just as Marduk used Tiamat's body to create the ordered world, or the Maya king subdued the mountain monster, the Harappans were literally building a bulwark of civilization against the unpredictable chaos of nature: the flooding rivers, the monsoons, the wild animals beyond the city walls. Their urban planning was their daily, practical ritual in the eternal struggle for order. Then, around 1900 BC, this magnificent, ordered world began to crumble. The civilization entered a period of dramatic decline. The great cities were gradually abandoned. The standardized weights and measures fell out of use. The intricate trade networks that stretched to Mesopotamia collapsed. The precise reasons are still debated by archaeologists, but the leading theories point to environmental chaos. The mighty Gagga-Hakra river system, the lifeblood of their civilization, may have shifted its course or dried up due to climate change, transforming fertile plains into arid dust bowls. Alternatively, a series of catastrophic floods or earthquakes might have shattered their infrastructure. Whatever the cause, it was a catastrophe on a civilization-ending scale. We can only imagine how the last generations of Harappans interpreted this unraveling of their world through their own mythological lens, as their meticulously maintained drains clogged with silt and their perfectly aligned streets began to empty. It must have felt as if the cosmic battle was being lost. If their horned yogi was indeed a deity who held chaos at bay, his power was clearly waning. The monstrous forces of drought, flood, or disease, the very chaos they had held back for centuries with their bricks and blueprints, were finally breaking through the gates. Their rituals, whatever they were, had failed. Their story, tragically, is one we cannot fully hear, a poignant reminder of how fragile our own narratives can be. The silence of the Indus Valley stands as a powerful testament to the countless human stories, myths, and struggles that have been utterly erased by time, leaving behind only cryptic clues and a lingering sense of a profound, forgotten conversation with the universe. If the Norse saw their end as a prophesied event to be met with courage, and the Maya saw it as a balance to be ritually maintained, the Aztecs lived with the terrifying knowledge that their world had already ended 4 times before, and that its continued existence required a constant, gruesome transfusion of human energy to prevent a 5th and final annihilation. Theirs was a cosmology of existential anxiety, a belief that the sun could literally stop in its tracks and the universe could unravel unless humanity fulfilled its sacred duty to feed the gods with the most precious substance in existence, human life itself. This was not a mythology about a battle won in the distant past, but an ongoing war that required daily human intervention on the front lines. The Aztec creation myth, as detailed in the Codex Chimalpopoca, tells of 5 successive suns or world ages. Each previous world had been destroyed by a different catastrophe: jaguars, hurricanes, volcanic rain of fire, and a great flood, each corresponding to one of the 4 elements. We are living in the 5th sun, the age of movement, which came into being through the most profound act of divine sacrifice at the sacred city of Teotihuacan. The gods gathered in darkness, knowing a new sun was needed. The wealthy god Tecusistecatl volunteered, but when the time came to leap into the great divine bonfire, he hesitated 4 times in fear. Then the humble and diseased god Nanahuatzin, covered in boils, gathered his courage and threw himself into the flames without hesitation. Shamed by this act, Tecusistecatl finally jumped in after him. 2 suns rose in the sky, but the other gods, angered by Tecusistecattl's cowardice, threw a rabbit at the 2nd sun, dimming its face, creating the moon. Yet even this was not enough. The new sun, Tenatia, hung motionless in the sky. He demanded payment. He would not move unless the other gods offered their own lives as sustenance. And so the god of wind, Ehecatl, sacrificed them all, cutting out their hearts to give the sun the sacred energy, the tonally, it needed to begin its journey across the sky. This foundational story established the central, non-negotiable tenet of Aztec life. The sun was not a self-sustaining ball of gas, but a divine being that had sacrificed itself for creation and now required sacrifice in return to keep moving. The world was literally powered by debt paid in blood. This cosmic debt was paid through the most dramatic state-sponsored ritual the world has ever known: human sacrifice. To the modern mind, it is an act of unparalleled barbarity, but to the Aztecs, it was a sacred, necessary act of cosmic maintenance. The victim, often a captured warrior from a neighboring state, was not seen as a criminal to be executed, but as a divine impersonator, an Ixipla. For days or even weeks before the ceremony, they would be treated as the living embodiment of the god they were to be sacrificed to, fed the finest foods and honored as divinity itself. On the day of the ceremony, they would be led to the summit of the towering pyramid temple. 4 priests would hold them down over the convex sacrificial stone, while a 5th priest, the Huitzilopochtli, would wield an obsidian blade sharper than any modern steel. With a precise, practiced motion, he would open the chest cavity and tear out the still beating heart. This heart, Yolia, was the seat of the soul and the essence of the precious tonally energy. It would be raised, steaming, to the sun as literal food, while the body was rolled down the temple steps. The limbs might be later distributed among the nobility as a sacred relic. This was not murder, it was the most extreme form of communion imaginable. It was the recycling of divine energy back to its source, a transaction to keep the machinery of the universe running for another day. The most powerful expression of this daily cosmic battle was the myth of Huitzilopochtli, the patron god of the Aztecs and the fierce southern sun of midday. His origin story is one of sudden, explosive violence. His mother, the earth goddess Coatlicue, was magically impregnated by a ball of feathers. Her daughter, Coilxauhqui, the moon goddess, and her 400 sons, the stars, were enraged by this shame and plotted to kill her for her dishonor. As they stormed the sacred mountain of Coatepec, Coatlicue gave birth to Huitzilopochtli, a fully grown and armed warrior. He sprang from her womb, beheaded his sister Coilxauhqui, and hurled her body down the mountainside, then chased away his 400 brothers, the stars, who scattered in terror. This myth was reenacted every single day at sunrise. Huitzilopochtli, the sun, had to defeat the moon and the stars each morning to begin his journey across the sky. And just as he needed the strength of the other gods to move at Teotihuacan, he now required strength from humanity. The hearts offered to him on the temple summit were the fuel for his daily battle, the energy he used to vanquish the forces of darkness once more. The great temple of Tenochtitlan itself was a physical model of this myth, a double pyramid representing Coatepec, with a temple to Huitzilopochtli on one side and a temple to Tlaloc, the rain god, on the other. At its base lay a massive, carved monolith of the dismembered Coilxauhqui, a constant reminder that the entire state rested upon the body of a vanquished chaos monster. This deeply ingrained worldview is what makes the arrival of the Spanish in 1519 so psychologically fascinating. When Hernán Cortés and his conquistadors, with their pale skin, beards, and strange ships, landed on the coast, the Aztec Emperor Moctezuma II did not initially see them as a foreign invasion force. His priests and advisors interpreted these events through their existing mythological framework. They wondered if the pale, bearded Cortés could be the god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, who, according to one prophecy, had departed to the east long ago, promising to return one day to reclaim his kingdom. The Spanish ships were described as moving temples or mountains on the water. Their cannons were seen as divine thunder. The Aztecs were not naive. They were attempting to fit an utterly unprecedented event into a cosmic narrative they understood, one of cyclical returns, divine manifestations, and ongoing celestial drama. They sent ambassadors with divine regalia, trying to determine if these were men or gods, because the answer would dictate their response. Were they witnessing a new chapter in the cosmic struggle, or was this a simple military threat? This initial hesitation, born from a mythology that saw all of reality through the lens of divine conflict, ultimately gave Cortés the crucial time and leverage he needed to form alliances with the Aztecs' enemies and begin the siege that would topple their empire. In the end, the Spanish brought a different kind of monster smallpox, which decimated the population and shattered the Aztecs' ability to maintain their ritual obligations. For a people who believed the world would end if the sacrifices stopped, the Spanish conquest may have felt less like a military defeat and more like the fulfillment of their deepest cosmological fear, the day the sun finally stood still. Across the vast expanse of Asia, another civilization was weaving its own intricate tapestry of order from the threads of chaos, finding in the dragon not a simple monster to be slain, but a powerful, ambivalent force of nature that demanded both reverence and resistance. Ancient Chinese cosmology presents a fascinatingly nuanced view of the cosmic struggle, where the dragon, or long, was not merely a symbol of evil, but a representation of the untamed, watery chaos that could bring both life-giving rain and catastrophic flood. The most defining feature of Chinese civilization was its relationship with its two great rivers, the Yellow River and the Yangtze. These arteries of life were also engines of destruction, capable of overflowing with devastating power, wiping out entire settlements and rewriting the landscape overnight. It is no surprise, then, that their foundational myth of order involves a hero who does not destroy the dragon, but who masters and redirects its chaotic aquatic energy for the benefit of humankind. This hero is Yu the Great, a figure who straddles the line between myth and history. The legend tells of a time when the world was engulfed by a terrible, universal flood, a chaos of water that threatened all creation. Yu's father, Gun, had attempted to stop the waters by building dams and dikes, an effort to block and contain the chaos that ended in catastrophic failure and his execution. Yu learned from this mistake. Instead of confronting the watery chaos head-on, he embarked on a monumental 13-year journey, mapping the land and enlisting the help of gods and magical creatures. His great task was to dredge new channels and canals to guide the floodwaters patiently and wisely back to the sea. In many versions of the tale, he is not fighting a single monster, but battling a host of dragon-like water spirits and recalcitrant river gods who personified the stubborn, chaotic flow of the waters. His victory was not one of annihilation, but of brilliant engineering and profound cooperation with the natural world. By mastering the dragons, he didn't kill them, he harnessed their power, transforming the devastating flood into a managed network of irrigation that created the fertile heartland of Chinese agriculture. Yu's success was so monumental that it earned him the mandate of heaven to found the Xia dynasty, the legendary first dynasty of China, establishing the ultimate precedent that the right to rule was earned through the successful management of chaos. This mythological framework became the bedrock of Chinese political philosophy for millennia. The concept of the mandate of heaven, or Tiananmen, was directly infused with the language of this cosmic struggle. The emperor was not just a political leader, he was the son of heaven, his primary role being to maintain the harmonious balance between heaven, earth, and humankind. This meant ensuring that the cosmic forces of order, represented by the virtue of his rule, prevailed over the forces of chaos. A well-ordered society would be rewarded with good harvests, mild weather, and social stability. But the appearance of omens, a devastating flood along the Yellow River, a crippling drought, a peasant rebellion, or even the appearance of a comet, were not seen as simple natural disasters or bad luck. They were interpreted as terrifying signs from heaven that the emperor was losing his virtue, that he was failing in his cosmic duty to battle disorder. The dragons of chaos were breaking free from their channels. This provided a powerful, divine justification for revolution. If a dynasty became corrupt and the land was plagued by catastrophe, it was clear evidence that the mandate had been withdrawn and that a new, more virtuous ruler was needed to restore the balance. This mythology made political theory created a self-correcting mechanism within the state, where the very forces of nature were the jury and judge of a ruler's legitimacy. We can see this worldview in action through the oldest written records in China, the oracle bones of the Shang dynasty. These ox scapulae and turtle plastrons were used for pyromancy, a sacred ritual where a hot rod was applied to the bone, causing it to crack. The king or his diviner would then read the patterns of these cracks to ascertain the will of the ancestors and the gods. The inscriptions on these bones are incredibly revealing. They show Shang kings constantly inquiring about their ongoing battle against chaos. Would the harvest be bountiful, or would drought demons destroy it? Would the queen give birth successfully, or would the chaos of childbirth complications prevail? Most importantly, would the upcoming military campaign against a rival tribe be victorious? The Shang kings saw their human enemies as manifestations of cosmic disorder, and warfare was a direct extension of the divine battle. Before a battle, they would make offerings to their powerful ancestor gods, seeking their assistance in the fight, much like a Sumerian king might pray to Marduk before facing a rival city-state. The intricate bronze vessels they cast for these rituals, adorned with staring eyes and stylized animal masks known as tauti, are themselves artifacts of this struggle. These fierce, protective faces were not merely decoration. They were apotropaic, designed to ward off evil spirits and chaotic forces, serving as a metallic bulwark for the sacred contents within. This seamless integration of myth, politics, and cosmology allowed Chinese civilization to achieve something remarkable: unparalleled longevity and cultural continuity. The story of Yu the Great controlling the waters provided a template that every subsequent emperor felt compelled to follow. Maintaining and expanding the system of dikes and canals on the Yellow River became one of the primary responsibilities of the state, a literal and symbolic reenactment of Yu's battle against the water dragons. A ruler who could successfully manage the rivers was demonstrating his virtue and his hold on the mandate of heaven. A ruler who failed was courting disaster, both natural and political. This narrative provided a powerful source of social cohesion, uniting the people under a ruler who could claim to be the guardian of cosmic order. It was a story that could be adapted and retold through every major dynasty, from the Zhou to the Qing, always serving the same purpose: to explain the inexplicable forces of nature, to legitimize political power, and to provide a framework for resilience in the face of the chaos that constantly threatened to swallow the Middle Kingdom. The dragon, therefore, remained a potent and complex symbol, not an enemy to be eradicated, but a powerful, untamed force that defined the very nature of imperial responsibility and the perpetual cost of maintaining civilization itself. Venturing into the misty highlands and deep forests of Iron Age Europe, we encounter a civilization whose entire worldview was predicated on the thrilling and terrifying idea that the barrier between our world and the next was impossibly thin. For the Celtic peoples, from the Gauls of mainland Europe to the tribes of Ireland and Wales, the cosmic battle was not a distant memory or a far-off prophecy. It was a daily reality happening just beyond the veil, in a parallel dimension they called the Otherworld. This was not a place of heaven or hell, but a realm of potent magic, immense beauty, and lurking danger, inhabited by powerful gods and monstrous forces that could bleed into our own reality at any moment, especially during the liminal hours of dusk and dawn or at certain times of the year. Their mythology, therefore, feels less like a story and more like a map to a hidden landscape that coexists with our own. This constant interaction is captured most dramatically in the Irish mythological cycle, which recounts the epic struggle between the Tuatha De Danann, the people of the goddess Danu, and the Fomorians, a race of monstrous, chaotic beings often depicted with deformities, some with one eye, one arm, or one leg, grotesque parodies of wholeness. The Tuatha De Danann were skilled in magic, art, and technology, representing a sophisticated, ordered society. The Fomorians, in stark contrast, were creatures of blight, darkness, and brute force, often associated with the wild, untamable sea and the harshness of winter. Their conflict was not merely a war between two tribes, it was the archetypal battle between the creative, life-giving forces of cultivation and the destructive, stagnant forces of chaos. The climactic clash came at the Second Battle of Mag Tuaid, where the champion of the Tuatha De, the god Lug of the Long Arm, faced the formidable Fomorian king, Balor of the Evil Eye, whose gaze could obliterate entire armies. Lug, using his mastery of all arts, managed to slay Balor, driving the Fomorians back and securing Ireland for the forces of order and prosperity. This foundational myth provided the Celts with a narrative to explain their own struggles against famine, harsh winters, and the unpredictable ocean, framing these challenges as incursions from a monstrous reality that needed to be constantly repelled. The guardians of these sacred stories were the Druids, the intellectual and spiritual elite of Celtic society. In a culture that largely relied on oral tradition, these learned individuals committed vast swaths of mythology, lore, and history to memory, acting as living libraries. They were the ones who would recite the epic tales of the gods' battles during great festivals, ensuring the community remembered the nature of the cosmic struggle and their role within it. When Christianity eventually spread through the Celtic lands, a fascinating transformation occurred. The monastic scribes, often themselves of Celtic descent, began to write down these ancient stories. But they did not simply erase them. They often subtly Christianized them, turning the Tuatha De Danann into a race of fallen angels or magical heroes, and reframing the battle against chaos as a struggle against pagan demons. This act of preservation, albeit through a new lens, is why we have texts like the Welsh Mabinogion or the Irish Book of Invasions today. The persistence of these myths across such a profound cultural shift shows just how deeply embedded they were in the Celtic soul. We are not solely reliant on these later texts for evidence, however. Archaeology provides stunning, tangible proof of how these mythological beliefs translated into real-world action. Across Europe, in the peat bogs and deep lakes that the Celts considered sacred portals to the otherworld, we have discovered incredible ritual deposits known as votive hoards. These are not casual losses but deliberate, often lavish offerings. Perfectly crafted swords, shields, and spears, some ritually bent or broken, have been pulled from the murky depths. Most famously, magnificent cauldrons of bronze and silver, like the stunning Gundestrup cauldron, were carefully placed in bogs. These were not hidden treasures meant to be retrieved. Scholars believe these were gifts to the gods and spirits of the otherworld, offered at times of crisis or during key festivals. The weapons may have been offered to curry favor for an upcoming real battle, asking the gods to fight alongside them. The cauldrons, potent symbols of rebirth, plenty, and the otherworld itself, might have been pleas for prosperity or offerings of thanks following a victory, either martial or agricultural. Each object sunk into the dark water was a prayer made physical, a direct transaction with the powers of the unseen realm to help maintain order in the face of chaos. This sense of a permeable world infused the entire Celtic landscape with sacred significance. A solitary hill or shire wasn't just a geographical feature, it was a gateway to the realm of the gods, the very home of the Tuatha De Danann, who were said to have retreated there after their defeat by the Milesians. A secluded spring wasn't just a source of water, it was the dwelling of a goddess who could offer healing or curses. An ancient, twisted oak forest wasn't just a source of timber, it was a place of immense power, the domain of the Druids and a potential mustering ground for spirits both benevolent and malevolent. This belief made every corner of their world a potential stage for the divine conflict. You weren't just walking through the woods, you were traversing a borderland where you might accidentally stumble into the otherworld or attract the attention of its inhabitants. This created a culture that was both fiercely brave in battle and deeply respectful of the natural world, which was seen as alive with conscious, powerful forces. This intricate mythological framework was not locked away in ritual spaces. It was woven into the very rhythm of Celtic life through their annual festivals. The four major fire festivals, Samhain, Imbolc, Beltane, and Lugnasad, each marked a liminal time when the veil between worlds was believed to be at its thinnest, and the potential for both blessing and chaos was at its peak. Samhain, the precursor to our Halloween, was particularly potent. It marked the end of the harvest and the beginning of the dark half of the year, a time when the Fomorian-like forces of winter and darkness were ascendant. It was believed that the spirits of the dead and other otherworldly beings could freely wander the earth. Great bonfires were lit not for warmth, but as protective, magical barriers against these chaotic incursions. The entire community would gather, extinguish their home fires, and relight them from the sacred communal blaze, symbolically uniting under the protective order of the gods. This was not mere superstition. It was a collective, ritualized act of defense, a way for the entire tribe to participate in holding the line against the encroaching chaos of the long, dark winter, ensuring that the sun and the order it represented would eventually return. But the truly fascinating evolution of these Mesopotamian myths occurred not just through conquest, but through a profound moment of cultural exchange born from one of history's great tragedies. When the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar II besieged Jerusalem, destroyed the Temple of Solomon, and forced the Jewish elite into exile in Babylon around 596 BC, he inadvertently created a crucible for theological transformation. The exiled Jews, cut off from their homeland and their sacred center of worship, were immersed in the heart of a vibrant, dominant culture with a rich and ancient mythological tradition. They heard the epic of Enuma Elish recited during the Akitu festival. They saw the grandeur of Marduk's temple and the power of a cosmology where a chief god battled a primordial sea monster to create the world. This exposure left an indelible mark on their own developing beliefs. We can see this influence vividly in the Hebrew Bible, particularly in the Book of Psalms and the poetic passages of Job and Isaiah, where Yahweh is described in terms that echo Marduk's and Baal's victories. He is the one who divided the sea, who broke the heads of the dragons in the waters, and who shattered the heads of Leviathan. The chaotic sea monster, Rahab, becomes a symbol of the forces of disorder that God subdued at creation. This was not a simple borrowing of stories. It was a sophisticated theological adaptation. The Jewish scribes, wrestling with the trauma of exile and the problem of evil, took the powerful Mesopotamian motif of divine conflict and refined it within their evolving monotheistic framework. The battle was no longer between competing gods, but was a demonstration of their one god's absolute sovereignty over all chaotic forces, both historical and cosmic. This moment shows us that these narratives were not static relics but living, traveling ideas that could be adopted, adapted, and transformed to help a displaced people make sense of their suffering and reaffirm their faith in the ultimate power of their God over the chaos of their circumstances. The Mesopotamian legacy, therefore, is one of incredible flexibility and enduring power. It demonstrates that the story of a god battling a monster is far more than a simple explanation for natural phenomena. It is a foundational political tool for empire, a psychological framework for interpreting crisis, and a cultural currency that can travel across borders and be exchanged between civilizations, constantly finding new relevance and new meaning for the human struggle to impose order on an ever-threatening world. Yet while the Mesopotamians saw their divine conflicts as foundational events and the Hittites as ongoing state rituals, the ancient Greeks performed perhaps the most sophisticated act of cultural synthesis, weaving these ancient battle narratives into the very fabric of philosophy, politics, and identity. The Greek world was a melting pot of Mediterranean ideas, and their genius lay not in creating entirely new myths, but in refining and reinterpreting the cosmic struggles they inherited from older civilizations, transforming them into stories that explored everything from the forces of nature to the depths of the human psyche. Their pantheon of gods did not emerge into a void. They fought their way to power in two of the most epic conflicts in mythology, the Titanomachy and the Gigantomachy. These were not mere battles, they were revolutions. The Titanomachy, the war between the Olympian gods and the older Titan gods, was a brutal 10-year struggle for cosmic supremacy. It was a generational conflict, a son overthrowing his father, a new order violently replacing the old. This was followed by the Gigantomachy, where the victorious Olympians had to defend their newly won throne against a monstrous uprising of giants, born from the blood of the Titan Uranus and the earth goddess Gaia. These giants were not just large humans, they were forces of primal chaos, often depicted with serpentine legs, embodying the raw, untamed power of the earth itself. Their defeat was the final, necessary act to secure the rule of law and order represented by Zeus and his pantheon over the chaotic, archaic forces of the past. This established a crucial Greek concept: that order is not a natural state, but a hard-won victory that must be vigilantly defended. This theme of battling monstrous chaos did not end with the gods. It was passed down to their half-human children, the heroes, who became the mortal champions of this divine order. The most famous of these was Heracles, whose entire life was a testament to this ongoing struggle. His famous 12 labors were not random tasks but a systematic campaign to rid the known world of monstrous threats. He battled the Nemean lion, an invulnerable beast terrorizing the countryside, the many-headed hydra, a serpentine plague from the swamp, and the Stymphalian birds, man-eating creatures with metallic feathers. Each labor was a localized skirmish in the greater cosmic war, with Heracles acting as the divine agent of civilization, pushing back the wild and dangerous edges of the world to make it safe for human settlement. Another hero, Perseus, faced the Gorgon Medusa, a creature so monstrous her gaze could turn men to stone. By beheading her, he did not just win a trophy, he mastered a potent symbol of petrifying, paralyzing fear itself. These hero myths served a vital purpose for ordinary Greeks. They provided a model of courage and resilience, demonstrating that even in the face of seemingly impossible, monstrous adversity, humanity could prevail with divine favor and heroic effort. But the Greek mind was never content with simple stories. As their civilization matured, particularly in Athens, philosophers and playwrights began to peel back the layers of these myths, searching for deeper meanings. Was the battle between Olympians and Titans merely a story of divine politics, or was it a metaphor for the triumph of intellect and reason over brute strength and instinct? Could the Gigantomachy represent the struggle of civilization to impose law and agriculture upon wild, untamed nature? The great tragedians like Aeschylus and Sophocles took these epic conflicts and internalized them. In their plays, the monster was often not a literal creature but an internal flaw, hubris, ambition, or rage that tore apart families and cities. The cosmic battle was moved from the heavens into the human heart, becoming a psychological drama about mastering the chaotic monsters within one's own soul. This intellectual adaptation allowed the old myths to remain profoundly relevant, providing a framework for Greeks to explore complex new ideas about ethics, governance, and human nature without abandoning their cherished cultural narratives. This mythological framework was suddenly thrust into the harsh light of real-world politics during the Persian Wars, when the colossal Achaemenid Empire, led first by Darius and then by Xerxes, invaded Greece. It was perceived by the Greeks as something far more sinister than a mere military campaign. The Persians, with their vast, seemingly endless armies, their exotic customs, and their absolute monarchy, were framed in the Greek mind as a real-life embodiment of the monstrous, chaotic forces from their own myths. They were the new giants, the new titans, rising from the east to threaten the divine order of the Greek world. The Greek city-states, for all their squabbling, represented reason, democracy, and freedom, the principles of Olympus. The Persian foe represented servitude, decadence, and despotic power, the chaos of the old order. This was not just propaganda, it was a fundamental way of understanding an existential threat. The incredible Greek victories at Marathon, Salamis, and Plataea were thus interpreted not just as tactical triumphs, but as cosmic ones. They were a reenactment of the Gigantomachy on the historical stage, where a small, disciplined force of civilization had once again triumphed against a massive, monstrous horde of barbarism. This victory cemented the connection between mythological narrative and cultural identity, making the defense of Greece synonymous with the defense of cosmic order itself. To keep this victorious feeling alive and to continually reinforce their hard-won cultural unity, the Greeks created their own ritual reenactments of these cosmic victories. The most famous of these was the Olympic Games, established according to legend by Zeus himself after his defeat of the Titans. This was far more than a sporting event. It was a pan-Hellenic festival that brought together the often fractious Greek city-states in a sacred truce. The competitions themselves, wrestling, boxing, the foot race, and especially the pancration, a brutal no-holds-barred fight, were microcosms of the heroic struggle. The athletes were not just competing for a laurel wreath, they were embodying the spirit of Heracles, testing their strength and virtue against worthy opponents, and reenacting the physical prowess that defined the heroic age. The chariot races echoed the sun god Helios driving his chariot across the sky, another daily victory over darkness. Similarly, the festival of the Panathenaea in Athens included a grand procession that culminated in presenting a new woven peplos to the statue of Athena. The robe was decorated with the scene of the Gigantomachy, a vivid, textile reminder of the goddess's role in defeating the giants and protecting the city. These festivals were the engines of Greek culture, constantly retelling the story of order's victory over chaos, and reminding every Greek citizen of their shared mythological heritage and the divine struggles that made their world possible. While the Greeks saw their divine battles as a backdrop for heroic drama and philosophical inquiry, and the Celts perceived them as occurring just beyond a thin veil in the otherworld, the Persian Empire constructed perhaps the most intellectually formidable and politically potent cosmological framework of all. Underpinning their vast multicultural state was a revolutionary religious vision that saw the entire universe and every human life within it as a battlefield in a single, grand cosmic war between two fundamental eternal principles, light and darkness. This was not a myth of the distant past, but a living reality that defined the present and dictated the future, transforming the Persian king from a mere ruler into a divinely appointed general in the ultimate struggle for existence. This worldview was the gift of the prophet Zoroaster, or Zarathustra, who preached a message of radical dualism. He taught that from the beginning there were two primordial spirits, Spenta Maniou, the benevolent spirit of light and creation, and Angra Maniou, the destructive spirit of darkness and falsehood. These two were not gods among many, but the very sources of all that is good and all that is evil. Spenta Maniou aligned himself with Ahura Mazda, the wise lord, the uncreated creator of all that is good. Angra Maniou became the adversary, the lie, the force of chaos that sought to corrupt and destroy Ahura Mazda's perfect creation. This was a stark departure from the often ambiguous moral landscapes of other mythologies. For the Zoroastrian, the line was absolute. Every thought, word, and deed was a choice that strengthened one side or the other in this universal war. There was no middle ground. The implications of this belief for the political structure of the Persian Empire were profound and immediate. The Achaemenid kings, from Cyrus the Great to Darius and Xerxes, were not just political leaders, they were the earthly agents of Ahura Mazda, the spearhead of light's offensive against the dominion of darkness. Inscriptions at Naksh-e-Rustam and Persepolis are explicit on this point. Darius the Great declares, "By the favor of Ahura Mazda I am king. Ahura Mazda bestowed the kingdom upon me." His role was to implement the divine concept of Ashat truth, order, and righteousness throughout the world and to vanquish Drudge, the lie, disorder, and chaos. This provided a powerful theological justification for the empire's relentless expansion. Conquering a neighboring kingdom was not mere imperialism. It was a sacred crusade to liberate territory from the forces of darkness and bring it into the ordered, truthful light of Ahura Mazda's realm. The Persian administration, famous for its tolerance and efficient bureaucracy, was not just a tool of control but a vehicle for spreading cosmic order, integrating diverse cultures into a system that opposed the chaotic lie. This sense of a divine mission infused the entire Persian court with a sense of cosmic purpose. The king's primary duty was to be a good shepherd to his people, protecting them from the ravages of both human enemies and natural disasters, which were seen as manifestations of Angra Maniou's influence. The vast royal road system that connected the empire from Sardis to Susa was not just an economic artery, it was a tangible web of Ashar, binding the empire together against the entropic forces of disunity and chaos. Even the magnificent royal gardens, or paradisa, from which we get the word paradise, were not merely pleasure grounds, they were microcosms of the perfect, ordered world Ahura Mazda had created, and which the king was duty-bound to cultivate and protect against the surrounding desert, a symbol of the barren lie. Every aspect of governance was a ritual act in the great cosmic struggle. This unshakable belief system faced its ultimate test in the 4th century BC with the invasion of Alexander the Great of Macedon. The disciplined Macedonian phalanx carved its way through the empire, culminating in the decisive defeats at Issus and Gaugamela. The royal capital of Persepolis was captured and burned, and the last Achaemenid king, Darius III, was murdered by his own satraps. To any outside observer, the Persian Empire had been utterly and completely destroyed. But through the Zoroastrian lens, this apocalyptic event was not a final defeat. The faithful priests, the Magi, interpreted this catastrophe as not a sign of Ahura Mazda's weakness or abandonment. Instead, it was a temporary triumph of the lie, a dark age prophesied to come before the final renovation of the world. Alexander was not just a foreign conqueror. He was accursed, known in Zoroastrian texts as Alexander the Accursed, a tool of Angra Mainyu whose victory was permitted as a test of faith and a purification of the faithful. This interpretation was a brilliant theological survival mechanism. It allowed the faithful to process unimaginable national trauma without collapsing into despair or abandoning their core beliefs. It demanded patience, perseverance, and unwavering commitment to the truth, trusting that the linear arc of time would eventually bend toward the ultimate victory of light. This concept of linear time was perhaps Persia's greatest philosophical gift to the world. Unlike the cyclical time of the Hindus, Norse, or Maya, where creation and destruction endlessly repeated, Zoroastrianism presented time as a linear narrative with a clear beginning, a tumultuous middle, and a definitive, glorious end. This story was moving inexorably toward the Frashokrati, the final renovation of the world. In this eschatological climax, a final savior would appear, the dead would be resurrected, and a great judgment would separate the followers of truth from the followers of the lie. Ahura Mazda would ultimately triumph, and Angra Mainyu and all his forces would be utterly destroyed and rendered impotent. The world would be restored to its original, perfect, eternal state. This vision of a definitive end to suffering and a final triumph of good over evil was a revolutionary idea that would deeply influence later Jewish apocalyptic thought during the Babylonian exile, and through Judaism, it would shape the development of Christianity and Islam. The entire Abrahamic concept of a day of judgment, a Messiah, and a final victory over evil finds one of its earliest and clearest expressions in the Zoroastrian struggle between light and darkness, a testament to how one civilization's divine conflict narrative could echo through millennia and reshape the spiritual landscape of the world. Now we travel to a land where the very soil seems to hum with ancient memory, to the continent of Australia, where Aboriginal cultures developed a relationship with the cosmic struggle so profound that it dissolves the boundary between myth and map, between the act of creation and the act of remembrance. Here, the foundational era is known as the dream time or the dreaming, but this term can be misleading to outsiders. It was not a dream in the sense of something unreal or that happened long ago and is now finished. The dreaming is a sacred, eternal dimension of reality, the time when the ancestor beings, the creator figures, emerged from a formless void and journeyed across the landscape, shaping the world through their epic actions, their conflicts, and their interactions with often monstrous forces. These were not battles for supremacy in a distant heaven, but struggles that literally formed the rivers, the mountains, the deserts, and the star systems themselves, imbuing every feature of the land with a story and a spiritual essence that remains potent to this day. The genius of these narratives lies in their dual function as both sacred scripture and a detailed, practical survival guide. An Aboriginal elder recounting the story of the rainbow serpent, a colossal ancestor being of immense creative and destructive power, is not merely telling a myth. They are reciting a geological and hydrological survey, The path of the rainbow serpent's journey underground is a map to aquifers and secret waterholes, crucial knowledge in an arid continent. The story of the Wati Katjara, the two men who hunted and defeated a giant carnivorous dingo that was terrorizing the people, encodes information about animal behavior, hunting techniques, and the location of specific caves for shelter. The battles between the ancestral eagle and crow might explain the seasonal patterns of wind and rain, dictating the optimal times for foraging or ceremony. This intricate weaving of spiritual drama with empirical environmental knowledge represents one of humanity's most sophisticated and enduring systems of information storage, a living library where the law, the land, and the lore are inseparable. This living connection is made visible across the vast expanse of Australia through the world's oldest continuous artistic tradition, rock art. In the hauntingly beautiful galleries of Arnhem Land, the Kimberley, and elsewhere, the ancestral battles are frozen in time. We see dynamic figures often adorned with intricate patterns, locked in combat with monstrous entities. These are not static pictures, they are powerful statements of presence. A painting of the Lightning Brothers fighting might be found in a region prone to dramatic electrical storms, a permanent reminder of the ongoing creative conflict that generates that very weather pattern. The act of repainting these figures, a practice carried out for tens of thousands of years, was not mere restoration. It was a ritual act of participation, a way of tapping into the eternal dreaming to renew the power of the ancestor and ensure their continued struggle against entropy and disorder maintained balance in the world. The rock face was not a canvas but a window into the ongoing cosmological drama. This belief in an ongoing process rather than a finished creation meant that humanity had an active and non-negotiable role to play. The stability of the world was not guaranteed. It was a collaborative effort between the people and the ancestors. This was achieved through a complex calendar of rituals, songs, and dances that were the direct responsibility of specific kinship groups who were the custodians of specific dreaming stories. A group responsible for the kangaroo dreaming would perform elaborate ceremonies to ensure the proliferation of the kangaroo species. Those connected to a water dreaming would sing the songs that maintained the flow of the springs. These were not requests or prayers in a supplicant sense. They were acts of partnership, of using ritual to lend their own energy to the ancestors' eternal work. The ceremony was the human contribution to the cosmic battle, a way of holding up their end of a bargain struck at the dawn of time. This system revealed its profound practical wisdom during periods of extreme environmental stress. Paleoclimatology tells us that Australia has experienced dramatic climatic shifts over the millennia, with periods of severe drought and desertification. During these times of crisis, Aboriginal communities did not simply pray for rain. They intensified their ritual participation in the cosmic struggle. They would gather and perform the stories of the great battles that had originally brought water to the land, such as the epic fights of the rainbow serpent. By singing the songs, dancing the journeys, and reenacting the conflicts of the ancestors, they were not asking for a miracle. They were performing a kind of metaphysical maintenance, reminding the land of its true, water-rich form and strengthening the ancestors in their perpetual fight against the forces of drought and chaos. Their survival through these cataclysmic changes is a testament to the resilience that this worldview fostered, proving that a story can be as vital a tool for adaptation as any piece of technology. The Aboriginal Australian understanding of divine conflict stands as a monumental achievement in human thought. It demonstrates that the most powerful myths are not escapist fantasies, but intricate models of reality that bind the spiritual, the ecological, and the social into a single, coherent whole. For over 60,000 years, this tradition has provided not just meaning, but a literal instruction manual for thriving on a demanding continent. It shows us a world where every hill and waterhole is a monument to an ancient struggle, where every ritual is an act of cosmic upkeep, and where humanity's role is not to conquer nature, but to sing it into continued existence, participating as humble but essential partners in the dreaming's eternal, creative war against the formless void. Deep in the steamy lowlands of what is now Veracruz and Tabasco, a culture emerged so foundational that its influence would ripple through Mesoamerican history for over 2,000 years. The Olmec, often called Mesoamerica's mother culture, remain one of history's most captivating enigmas. They left behind no deciphered written records, no Rosetta Stone to unlock their language. Instead, they speak to us through stone, through artifacts of such profound and mysterious power that they whisper of a complex mythological world where the boundaries between human, animal, and divine were fluid, and where the cosmic battle between order and chaos was fought through shamanic might and ritual mastery. The most iconic of these stone voices are the colossal heads. 17 of these monumental basalt sculptures have been discovered, each weighing many tons and carved with astonishing individuality. They are not generic idols, they possess distinct facial features, headgear, and expressions, leading many scholars to believe they portray powerful Olmec rulers. But look closer, the helmets they wear often resemble the knotted skin of a jaguar, and their lips are sometimes depicted with a distinctive downturned, snarling quality that echoes the big cat's mouth. This is our first clue to their worldview. These rulers were not just political leaders, they were divine intermediaries, perhaps seen as descendants of or conduits for a powerful jaguar deity. In a world where the jaguar was the apex predator of the jungle, its strength, night vision, and lethal power made it the ultimate symbol of raw, untamable natural force. For an Olmec king to embody the jaguar was to claim mastery over that very chaos, to harness the jungle's fearsome energy and wield it for the protection and order of his people. This theme of human-animal transformation is even more explicit in the smaller, more intricate artifacts. Exquisitely carved jade and serpentine figurines depict figures in a state of spiritual transition. Their features a blend of human and jaguar, often with a characteristic cleft head, almond-shaped eyes, and a snarling, baby-like mouth. Scholars call these word jaguar figures. They likely represent not monsters to be feared, but shamans or gods in the process of acquiring the jaguar's power. This transformation was probably central to Olmec ritual. A shaman, through trance induced by hallucinogens, bloodletting, or rhythmic ceremony, would journey into the spirit world to do battle with chaotic forces that threaten the community, perhaps drought, disease, or spiritual imbalance. He would return with the jaguar's power, having wrestled order from chaos, much like a god battling a primordial monster. These small jade figures were perhaps talismans of that victorious transformation, sacred objects that captured the moment a human champion won a skirmish in the eternal cosmic war. The Olmec did not just explore this struggle through art, they encoded it into the very landscape of their ceremonial centers. At San Lorenzo, the oldest known Olmec center, the entire plateau was artificially sculpted into a sacred landscape. Vast stone drains and channels were built, some ending with carved monument bases. It is believed that during ritual events, water, or perhaps even blood from sacrifices, would flow through these channels, symbolically washing chaos and impurity away from the ceremonial heart of the city and into the underworld. This was hydraulic engineering in the service of mythology, a literal plumbing system for managing cosmic forces. At the later center of La Venta, the architecture takes on even greater cosmological significance. The Great Pyramid there, one of the earliest in Mesoamerica, is not square but fluted, rising from the flat plain like a volcanic mountain or a primordial island of creation emerging from the sea. The Olmec likely believed their rituals on this man-made mountain helped the gods maintain the world against a return to the watery chaos that existed before time. Their sophisticated understanding of the cosmos is further hinted at through their early developments in astronomy and timekeeping. They are credited with creating the first Mesoamerican calendar, a foundation upon which the Maya would later build their own intricate long count. This was not merely a tool for agriculture, it was a divine map of time itself. The movements of the sun, moon, and planets were seen as celestial expressions of the gods' ongoing struggles. An eclipse wasn't an astronomical event, it was a momentary victory for a darkness monster attempting to devour the sun. The Olmec calendar allowed priests to predict these moments of cosmic vulnerability, to know when the battle in the heavens was reaching a climax, and to stage their own powerful rituals on Earth to assist the solar deity in its fight. Their ceremonial ball game, played in stone courts, was likely far more than a sport. It may have reenacted the celestial battle of heavenly bodies, with the rubber ball representing the sun being fought over by teams embodying the forces of light and darkness. Then, around 400 years before the Common Era, the heart of Olmec civilization ceased to beat. Their great centers like La Venta were systematically and ritually defaced. Monuments were buried, sculptures were decapitated, and the cities were abandoned to the jungle. The reasons remain a mystery, perhaps soil exhaustion, internal rebellion, or a shift in trade routes. But while their cities died, their ideas did not. The people themselves likely dispersed, carrying their foundational myths with them into the wider Mesoamerican world. The word jaguar concept evolved into the Maya's wayub, or spirit companions. The colossal head may have inspired the later giant stone heads of the Zapotec at Monte Alban. Their calendar and their vision of the world as a fragile order maintained by ritual became the bedrock of all subsequent cultures in the region. The Olmec legacy is a powerful reminder that the most enduring elements of a civilization are not its stone monuments but its stories. Though their own voices are silent, we hear their echoes every time we see a Maya carving of a hero defeating a monster of the underworld, or an Aztec priest dressed as a jaguar warrior, continuing a cosmic battle that began in the humid jungles of the Gulf Coast over 3,000 years ago. If you thought the battle between order and chaos was a one-time event, the Hindu tradition presents a far more dynamic and relentless vision, a cosmic drama that has been cycling through endless ages, with each turn of the wheel demanding that the gods, and humanity alongside them, take up arms once more against the rising tide of darkness. This is not a mythology with a single creation and a final judgment, but an eternal process of preservation, a continuous dance where the universe breathes in and out, and with each exhalation, the forces of chaos, known as the Asuras, gather their strength to challenge the delicate balance of creation. At the heart of this perpetual struggle is the profound concept of Dharma, which is far more than just righteousness. It is the very underlying order of the cosmos, the principle that holds reality together. Its opposite, adharma, is not merely evil, but an active force of entropy, deception, and disintegration that constantly seeks to unravel the fabric of existence. Humanity is not a passive audience to this drama. We are conscripted soldiers on this cosmic battlefield, and every thought, word, and action is a vote cast for one side or the other. The supreme embodiment of this eternal vigilance is the god Vishnu, the preserver. While other gods create or destroy, Vishnu's singular role is to maintain. He is the divine equilibrium, and he intervenes directly whenever the scales tip too far toward adharma. His interventions are not distant miracles, they are his avatars, his descents into the mortal realm. The Dashavatara, his 10 primary incarnations, form a breathtaking narrative of divine strategy unfolding across time. It begins with a fish, Matsya, who saves the first man from a cosmic flood, preserving life itself. It progresses to a boar, Varaha, who dives to the bottom of the cosmic ocean to lift the drowned Earth back to the surface on his tusks, a primal act of rescuing order from the watery chaos. It includes the half-lion, half-man Narasimha, who emerges from a pillar to eviscerate a demon king who had believed himself invincible due to a loophole in his own boon, proving that divine justice can find a way through any legalistic deception. And it culminates in his most beloved human forms, Rama, the perfect king who battles the demon Ravana to rescue his wife and restore ethical rule, and Krishna, the divine statesman and charioteer who in the Bhagavad Gita articulates the very philosophy of selfless action in the midst of a horrific civil war. Each avatar is a precise, surgical strike against a specific manifestation of Adharma, demonstrating that the divine response to chaos is not monolithic, but adapts to the specific need of the age. This grand cosmic conflict is brought down to a human scale in the two great epic poems that form the backbone of Indian culture, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. These are not mere stories, they are vast, intricate mirrors reflecting the celestial struggle in the realm of human emotion, ambition, and duty. The Ramayana is often seen as the clearer allegory. The noble Prince Rama is Dharma incarnate, unjustly exiled to the forest. His antagonist, the 10-headed demon king Ravana, is the embodiment of Adharma, a being of immense power, knowledge, and wealth, but corrupted by his own ego and desire. The epic battle on the island of Lanka is a mythic spectacle, but its core is a very human story about the defense of righteousness and the bonds of love against the corrosive power of selfishness and lust. The Mahabharata presents a far more complex and terrifying picture. It is a sprawling saga of a catastrophic war between cousins, the Pandavas and the Kauravas. Here, the lines between Dharma and Adharma are devastatingly blurred. Good people fight on the wrong side, bad actions are committed for the right reasons, and the heroes themselves are forced to compromise their morals to achieve victory. The entire narrative builds toward a moment of supreme spiritual crisis on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, where the great archer Arjuna lays down his weapons, overwhelmed by the horror of fighting his own family. It is here that Krishna, serving as his charioteer, delivers the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, a philosophical masterpiece that reframes the entire war. He explains that the true battle is not external but internal. The fight against one's own kin is an allegory for the struggle against the chaotic impulses within one's own mind, desire, anger, and greed. The cosmic war is thus internalized. Every human being is their own Kurukshetra, and life itself is the battlefield where one must choose action aligned with duty over action driven by selfish desire. This mythology is not locked away in ancient texts. It is a living, breathing force that plays out in vibrant color across India every single day. Hindu temple architecture is itself a symbolic fortress against chaos. The towering gateways, or gopurams, are covered in sculptures of gods and demons locked in eternal combat, a visual reminder of the struggle one must pass through to enter the sacred space within. The temple's inner sanctum, the Garbhagriha or womb chamber, houses the deity as a concentrated pillar of divine order, a direct counterpoint to the formless chaos outside. This ritual reenactment reaches its most spectacular form during festivals. The 9 nights of Navaratri are a nationwide celebration of the goddess Durga's epic battle against the shape-shifting buffalo demon Mahishasura. Elaborate clay idols depict the moment of her victory, 1 foot planted on the buffalo's back, a trident plunged into its heart, a powerful, timeless image of divine feminine power subduing brute, chaotic force. On the 10th day, Vijayadashami, these idols are joyfully immersed in rivers and oceans, symbolizing the dissolution of the demon's power and the temporary restoration of order, a victory that must be won again and again. This flexible, cyclical framework provided an incredibly powerful tool for Indian civilization to process immense historical trauma. When faced with successive waves of foreign invasion, from the Central Asian Turks to the Mughals, the priestly and philosophical class did not simply see these events as political failures. They were interpreted through the lens of the cosmic cycle. The rise of a powerful, alien ruler could be framed as the ascendance of a new Asura, a manifestation of Adharma appropriate for a dark age or Kali Yuga. This was not a call for passive acceptance, but for renewed spiritual resistance and the hope for a future avatar to restore balance. The stories of Rama and Krishna provided a template for resilience, a cultural memory of past victories against overwhelming demonic forces that fueled the belief that order, though eclipsed, would eventually return. This ability to absorb historical shock into a larger, timeless narrative helped preserve Hindu culture and identity through centuries of profound change, proving that a story about gods and monsters can be one of the most durable shields a civilization can possess. Now we set our course for the vast, open expanse of the Pacific Ocean, to a people for whom the sea was not a barrier but a pathway, not a mystery but a known text written in waves, stars, and stories. The Polynesian navigators achieved one of the most astounding feats of human expansion in history, settling the scattered islands of the Pacific Triangle in double-hulled canoes, guided by nothing but their profound knowledge of the natural world and the rich mythological maps they carried in their minds. For them, the cosmic battle between order and chaos was not a distant event but a daily reality played out on the shifting, often treacherous canvas of the ocean, a drama where their skill and ritual were essential to maintaining the balance of life itself. This intimate relationship with divine conflict is encoded in their foundational texts, like the Hawaiian Cumulipo, a profound creation chant that is anything but a simple Genesis story. It describes a deep, primordial darkness, a chaotic potential from which life emerges in successive, paired generations. The process is not a peaceful unfolding, but a dynamic, often violent struggle where later generations of gods must overcome or subdue earlier, more chaotic forms. The god Cain, associated with life and light, must contend with the forces represented by Ku, the god of war, and Kanaloa, often associated with the ocean depths and the unknown. This is not a story of good versus evil, but of differentiation, of bringing form and function out of a formless void. The emergence of the world is a hard-won victory against entropy, establishing the patterns of the sky, the land, and the sea that make navigation and life possible. To recite the Cumulipo was not merely to remember a myth, it was to reaffirm the very order of the cosmos, to ritually participate in the ongoing process of keeping the chaotic darkness at bay. This cosmological framework was the bedrock of the navigator's art. When a master navigator, a PWO, set out across thousands of miles of open ocean, he was not just a sailor, he was a reader of a sacred text. The ocean swells were not random waves, they were the breathing of the sea god. The specific flight patterns of birds pointed not just to land, but to the pathways of ancestral spirits. The star constellations were not impersonal guides, they were the Huakai, the marching path of the gods across the night sky. A sudden, violent storm was not merely bad weather, it was the manifestation of a furious ocean deity, a temporary uprising of the chaotic forces that the gods had subdued. The navigator's incredible skill in wayfinding, reading cloud formations, watercolor, and animal behavior was thus deeply intertwined with his understanding of mythology. He was literally sailing across a landscape alive with divine and monstrous presence, and his success depended on respecting its rules and understanding its moods. The story of the god Maui fishing the islands up from the depths was a metaphorical map, reinforcing the idea that the islands were isolated points of order rising from a vast, chaotic ocean, and that reaching them required both cunning and courage. The spiritual energy that fueled this entire system was mana, a concept of impersonal supernatural power that infused people, places, and objects. Chiefs, priests, and master navigators were believed to possess great mana, which was not inherent but had to be maintained and increased through correct action, ritual, and observance of tapu, the sacred prohibitions that kept different realms separate. A navigator preparing for a voyage underwent intense spiritual and physical purification. His canoe was not just a vessel but a consecrated space, its construction surrounded by ritual to imbue it with mana for the journey. The success of the voyage, the ability to find new islands and sustain life upon them, was seen as direct evidence of the navigators and the chief's potent mana. Conversely, getting lost, a failed fishing expedition, or a natural disaster were signs of weakened mana, a loss of spiritual power that had allowed the forces of chaos to gain a temporary advantage. Thus, the exploration and settlement of the Pacific was not just a physical endeavor but a spiritual conquest, an extension of the divine order into the chaotic void of the unknown ocean, powered by human mana aligned with the gods. This deeply ingrained worldview shaped the earliest encounters with Europeans in the 18th century, when the massive alien ships of Captain James Cook and others appeared on the horizon. They did not fit into any existing category of Polynesian experience. Their size, their complex rigging, their pale-skinned crews, and their incredible weapons were utterly unprecedented. Polynesian communities did not initially interpret these arrivals through a lens of mere curiosity or military threat. They filtered them through their mythological framework of cosmic interaction. In some cases, like Cook's arrival in Hawaii during the Makahiki festival dedicated to the god Lono, his ship's mast and sails bore a passing resemblance to the symbols of that deity. This led some to initially perceive him as Lono returned, a divine manifestation from the mythical homeland of Kahiki. This was not naivety. It was a rational attempt to process an impossible event by fitting it into the only logical system they had, one where gods, ancestors, and powerful spirits were active participants in the world. They were assessing whether this was a new chapter in their eternal cosmic narrative, a visitation from a benevolent deity, or perhaps a monstrous force from the deep requiring a specific ritual response. The Polynesian experience offers a breathtakingly clear example of mythology in action as a survival technology. Their stories of gods battling oceanic chaos were not escapist fantasies. They were the operating system for one of humanity's most daring adventures. The myths provided the psychological fortitude to venture into the unknown, the intellectual framework to understand a dynamic environment, and the social structure to maintain cohesion on long, perilous voyages. They linked the practical knowledge of wayfinding to a cosmic purpose, making the navigator a hero in an eternal struggle for order. This seamless integration of spiritual belief and empirical observation allowed them to not just survive, but to thrive across 10 million square miles of ocean, creating a network of connected cultures whose understanding of the world, though expressed through different gods and stories, was fundamentally rooted in the same heroic struggle to bring and maintain life upon the sea. Crossing the continent of Africa, we find a tapestry of civilizations so rich and diverse that their myths and legends form a symphony of different voices, yet they all harmonize around a universal theme: the eternal necessity of divine forces to combat the ever-present threat of chaos. Unlike the more unified mythological systems of Rome or Egypt, the African experience is one of countless kingdoms and cultures, each with their own unique pantheon and stories, yet all understanding the universe as a dynamic balance that required constant vigilance and ritual upkeep. From the lush rainforests of the Yoruba to the stone citadels of Great Zimbabwe, the narrative of gods and heroes waging war against disorder was woven into the very fabric of daily life, governance, and survival. Consider the Yoruba people of what is now Nigeria, whose spiritual system revolves around the Orisha, a vast assembly of divine beings, each governing a specific force of nature or aspect of human experience. Their mythology is not a simple tale of a single creation, but an ongoing divine administration where order is perpetually negotiated. A central figure is Ogun, the Orisha of iron, war, and technology. He is a quintessential warrior god who clears the path through the primal, chaotic forest with his machete, making way for civilization, law, and community. Yet Ogun possesses a terrifying duality. The same power that builds cities and forges tools can descend into the chaos of uncontrollable rage and bloody conflict. His veneration is a recognition that the tools of order are intrinsically linked to the potential for destruction, and he must be honored to keep his violent aspects in check. Another pivotal story is that of Obatala, the sky god charged by the supreme deity Olodumare with creating the physical world. He descended on a golden chain and began shaping the first humans from clay. But one day he grew thirsty and drank palm wine, becoming intoxicated. In this altered state, his creation went awry, resulting in individuals with physical deformities. This profound myth explains the existence of human difference not as a punishment, but as a consequence of a divine error, a moment of chaos introduced into the creative process that required compassion and acceptance to reintegrate into the ordered world. The Yoruba thus developed an intricate system of rituals, music, and divination through the Ifa corpus to communicate with the Orisha, seeking their guidance to navigate life's challenges and maintain spiritual equilibrium against the constant pull of disorder. Far to the west, in the powerful kingdom of Dahomey, a different but equally complex system emerged. Their cosmology centered on Mawu Lisa, a dualistic supreme deity representing the moon and the sun, female and male, night and day. This pairing embodied the essential balance of the cosmos. Mawu, the moon goddess, was associated with motherhood, rest, and the cool night, while Lisa, the sun god, represented strength, power, and the heat of day. Together, they created the universe and gave birth to the other gods who served as their intermediaries. The Dahomean worldview was deeply integrated with the state's political structure. The king was considered a direct descendant of these deities, and his primary role was to embody this balance and ensure the kingdom's harmony. Annual rituals and ceremonies were state events designed to reinforce this cosmic order, ensuring fertile harvests and military success. The very existence of the kingdom, with its powerful army and intricate bureaucratic structure, was seen as a bulwark against the external chaos of the wilderness and rival states. The famous Dahomey Amazons, the elite female regiment, were not just soldiers. They were seen as divine instruments of the kingdom's power, perhaps even earthly manifestations of the protective and fierce aspects of the Mawu-Lisa duality, tasked with physically defending the ordered world from the chaos of invasion and conflict. Moving south to the expansive territories of the Zulu people, we encounter a mythology that emphasizes the establishment of order from a primordial state of nothingness. The supreme being, Unkulunkulu, which translates to the Great Great One, is said to have emerged from a vast bed of reeds in the beginning of time. He then brought forth the first people, cattle, and all the elements of the world, teaching humanity how to live, how to hunt, and how to structure their societies. While Zulu mythology has fewer epic tales of gods battling monstrous entities, the struggle against chaos is instead reflected in the social and natural world. The concept of Ubuntu, the philosophy that I am because we are, is itself a social bulwark against the chaos of individualism and conflict. It represents a divine order imposed on human relationships. Furthermore, natural disasters, diseases, and social strife were often attributed to the anger of ancestral spirits or the work of malicious sorcerers disrupting the natural order. Rituals performed by sangomas or diviner healers were essential to diagnose these disruptions and restore balance, whether through communication with the ancestors, the use of medicinal herbs, or community cleansing ceremonies. The Zulu king, or Nkosi, held a sacred role as the custodian of this order, and his authority was derived from his ability to maintain stability and prosperity, protecting his people from both human and supernatural threats. The architectural marvel of Great Zimbabwe stands as a silent but powerful testament to how cosmological beliefs could shape a civilization's physical footprint. The great stone enclosures, built without mortar from precisely cut granite blocks, are a masterpiece of order rising from the landscape. The layout of the city, with its concentric walls, its high-walled royal enclosure, and its strategic placement, likely reflected a deep cosmological principle. The separation of spaces for the ruler, the priests, and the common people mirrored a celestial hierarchy, creating a microcosm of the ordered universe within the city walls. The very act of constructing such a permanent, imposing structure was a declaration of victory over chaos, a statement that this civilization was here to stay, imposing its will and its order on the land. The wealth of Great Zimbabwe, derived from its vast trade networks in gold and ivory that stretched across the Indian Ocean, would have been seen not just as economic success but as divine favor, a reward for maintaining the correct ritual and social order against the chaotic forces that threatened less fortunate communities. This profound interconnection between myth and reality became most apparent during times of crisis. When a devastating drought gripped the land, it was not merely a weather pattern. For the Yoruba, it might signal that the Orisha of the river Ocean was offended and had withdrawn her waters, requiring elaborate offerings and ceremonies to appease her. For a Dahomean king, a prolonged drought could be interpreted as a sign that the balance between Mawu and Lisa was upset, necessitating a national ritual of atonement and realignment. When epidemics struck or when political instability threatened a kingdom, the immediate response was not just practical but deeply spiritual. Rituals would be intensified, diviners would be consulted, and the people would collectively reenact the foundational myths of their culture, symbolically repelling the forces of chaos and pleading with the gods to restore the balance that ensured health, fertility, and peace. The diversity of these African traditions, from the Orisha pantheon to the dualistic Mawu Lisa and the primordial Unkulunkulu, demonstrates the incredible adaptability of the human spirit. Across vastly different environments and social structures, the core idea remained: the universe is a delicate balance, and it is the sacred duty of gods and humans alike to fight an endless, collaborative war to preserve it. Imagine the profound disorientation of being torn from your homeland, your sacred temple destroyed, and forced to live in the glittering capital of the very empire that conquered you. This was the reality for the Jewish elite exiled to Babylon in the 6th century BCE, and it was in this crucible of trauma and cultural collision that one of history's most remarkable theological transformations took place. Surrounded by the grandeur of Marduk's ziggurat and immersed in a culture that recited the Enuma Elish with state-sponsored fervor, the Jewish scribes were confronted with a powerful, polytheistic narrative of divine conflict. They heard of Marduk's epic battle against the primordial sea dragon Tiamat, a story that explained creation itself through violent, cosmic struggle. Rather than simply rejecting this foreign myth, they performed a breathtaking act of theological adaptation. They took the powerful motif of the chaos monster and refined it for their increasingly monotheistic faith. The God of Israel, Yahweh, was not one God among many fighting for supremacy. He was the one supreme deity whose mastery over all chaotic forces was absolute and unquestionable. Thus, the Babylonian dragon Tiamat found a new, potent life in the Hebrew Psalms and the Book of Job as Leviathan and Rahab, monstrous personifications of chaos that Yahweh had subdued at the dawn of time. The psalmist declares, "You divided the sea by your might, you broke the heads of the dragons in the waters, you crushed the heads of Leviathan." This was not a borrowed story, it was a reclaimed and repurished symbol. The battle was no longer between competing deities but a demonstration of their one God's ultimate sovereignty, a way to assert that their God, even in defeat and exile, was still the master of all creation, able to crush the mightiest symbols of chaos with a word. This reinterpretation became a vital source of resilience during the exile and beyond, as the Jewish people faced centuries of persecution under successive empires from the Greeks and their forced Hellenization to the brutal oppression of the Romans. Their literature began to frame these historical nightmares as new chapters in the same eternal cosmic conflict. This shift is vividly clear in the apocalyptic writings that emerged during these dark times, most famously in the Book of Daniel. Here, the struggle is no longer against a single mythological sea serpent, but against vast, terrifying empires themselves, envisioned as monstrous beasts emerging from a chaotic sea. Daniel has a vision of 4 great beasts, one like a lion with eagle's wings, another like a bear, a third like a leopard with 4 wings and 4 heads, and a fourth, indescribably terrible beast with iron teeth and 10 horns. These are not literal monsters but symbolic representations of the Babylonian, Median, Persian, and Greek empires, the very forces of political and cultural chaos that had oppressed and were oppressing the Jewish people. The message of Daniel is one of ultimate hope. Just as Yahweh vanquished Leviathan at creation, he would eventually vanquish these beastly empires, establishing an everlasting kingdom ruled by a divine figure, the Son of Man. This apocalyptic framework transformed their historical suffering. It was no longer random persecution. It was a predictable part of a cosmic drama where they were on the side of divine order, and their faithfulness during tribulation was a form of spiritual warfare, ensuring their ultimate vindication when God finally triumphed. This mythological framework did not fade with time. It evolved and deepened, particularly within the mystical tradition of Kabbalah that began to flourish in the Middle Ages. Kabbalistic thought internalized the cosmic battle, mapping it onto the very structure of the divine realm and the human soul. The concept of the Sitra Atra, the other side, emerged as a personification of the forces of impurity and chaos that exist in a constant state of opposition to the holy. Human actions directly influence this spiritual battle. Every ethical choice, every mitzvah performed, is a blow against the forces of chaos and an act of healing for the world, a concept known as tikkun olam, or repairing the world. Conversely, sinful acts empower the Sitra Atra. This mysticism provided a deeply personal and empowering way to understand the Jewish experience of diaspora and persecution. Even a Jew living in a small shtetl, facing poverty and prejudice, could see their daily prayers and rituals as essential contributions to a vast cosmic struggle between light and darkness, order and chaos. Their personal faithfulness had universal consequences, helping to gather the scattered sparks of divine light and restore harmony to a fractured creation. This enduring narrative of divine conflict against overwhelming odds became a cornerstone of Jewish identity, a cultural and spiritual engine for survival. Across 2,000 years of diaspora, through expulsions, pogroms, and the Holocaust, the story of a God who battles monsters and a people who participate in that struggle provided a profound sense of meaning and hope. It framed their existence not as a story of perpetual victimhood, but as one of active, faithful resistance against the chaotic forces of hatred, assimilation, and annihilation. The Passover Seder, which retells the story of liberation from Egyptian bondage, is perhaps the ultimate expression of this. It is not a simple history lesson. It is a ritual reenactment where every participant is commanded to see themselves as personally having gone out from Egypt. It is an annual reaffirmation that the God who triumphed over the chaos of Pharaoh's empire will triumph again. The Jewish adaptation of the divine conflict myth is a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It shows how a story can be stripped of its polytheistic origins, infused with profound new theological meaning, and become a vital tool for a people to navigate unimaginable hardship, never losing hope that the forces of order, no matter how besieged, will ultimately prevail. While the Norse met their prophesied doom with stoic courage, and the Aztecs fought to fuel the very sun, the Byzantine Empire crafted a vision of cosmic conflict so intricate it transformed the very air its citizens breathed. Here, in the glittering, gilded heart of Constantinople, the battle between order and chaos was not merely a story from scripture. It was the foundational principle of the state, a continuous spiritual war where every citizen was a soldier, every liturgy was a battle plan, and the emperor himself was the supreme general in a celestial campaign. Byzantine Christianity masterfully absorbed the ancient mythological need for a hero battling a monster and refined it into a comprehensive theology of spiritual warfare, creating a society that saw itself as the last bastion of divine order on earth, perpetually besieged by the demonic forces of heresy and invasion. This worldview was painted in brilliant colors and shimmering gold mosaics across the walls of countless churches. Walk into any Byzantine basilica, and you would be surrounded by an army of holy warriors. There was Saint George not as a historical figure, but as the eternal dragon slayer, his spear perpetually plunging into the beast's jaw, a timeless image of faith triumphing over the serpent of paganism and sin. There was the Archangel Michael, not a gentle guide of souls, but a mighty general clad in imperial armor, his foot often planted on the neck of a defeated Satan, representing the victory of heavenly authority over the rebellious chaos of the fallen angel. These were not just decorations, they were doctrinal statements in visual form. Icons were considered windows into heaven, and by filling their sacred spaces with these images of victory, the Byzantines were constantly reinforcing the reality of their triumph in the spiritual realm. The faithful didn't just pray to these saints, they rallied behind them, drawing courage from their victories, believing that the same power that felled the dragon was actively defending the walls of Constantinople against the Persians, the Arabs, and later the Turks. This theological framework became the primary lens through which the empire interpreted its relentless string of military crises. For nearly 1,000 years, Byzantium was almost constantly at war. The savage Sasanian Persians, the explosive expansion of the Arab caliphates, the relentless pressure from the Seljuk and Ottoman Turks. Each new enemy was never seen as just a human adversary with political or territorial ambitions. Through the Byzantine spiritual lens, they were something far more sinister. They were literal instruments of the devil, earthly manifestations of the chaotic forces that had been fighting God since the beginning of time. A Persian army at the gates was not just a national security threat. It was a physical incarnation of the dragon Saint George had slain. The rise of Islam was interpreted not as a new Abrahamic faith, but as a Christian heresy, a diabolical deception designed to mislead the faithful and fracture Christ's church. This interpretation transformed every war into a holy war, a crusade in defense of orthodoxy itself. It gave soldiers a transcendent reason to fight and die, framing their sacrifice as a direct contribution to the cosmic battle between the city of God and the forces of darkness. The emperor was the linchpin of this entire system, a figure who seamlessly blended Roman political authority with Christian theology. He was not simply a king, he was the Isapostolos, the equal to the apostles, and God's vicegerent on earth. His role was to be the earthly reflection of Christ Pantocrator, the all-powerful ruler of the cosmos depicted in the dome of every major church. Imperial ceremonies were meticulously crafted to reinforce this divine connection. The coronation was a sacred rite. The triumphal processions through the city were carefully staged reenactments of Christ's entry into Jerusalem, and even the way the emperor received foreign ambassadors was designed to showcase his role as the defender of global order. The vast, intricate liturgy of the Hagia Sophia was not separate from statecraft. It was the highest form of statecraft. When the choirs sang and the incense swirled, they were not just worshipping God, they were magically reinforcing the divine order of the universe, lending spiritual strength to the armies on the frontier and affirming the emperor's God-given right to rule. The state and the church were two sides of the same golden coin, jointly managing the empire's participation in the cosmic struggle. When this divinely protected empire inevitably faced setbacks, the interpretation was never that their theology was wrong, but that their faith had wavered. A devastating military defeat, like the Arab conquest of the rich provinces of Syria and Egypt, was not a failure of strategy. It was a collective punishment for sin, a sign that the people had grown lax in their spiritual duties and had allowed the forces of chaos to gain a temporary advantage. Similarly, internal theological controversies, like the violent debates over iconoclasm, whether icons were holy or idolatrous, were not intellectual disagreements. They were seen as catastrophic civil wars within the spiritual army itself, a demonic plot to sow confusion and weaken the empire's defenses from within. The response to such crises was always the same: a call for collective repentance, a renewal of religious fervor, and a doubling down on orthodox ritual. The solution to a Turkish invasion was not just to recruit more soldiers, but to hold city-wide processions, to venerate relics with greater intensity, and to purge heretical ideas, thereby strengthening the spiritual front lines so the physical ones could hold. The breathtaking synthesis achieved by the Byzantine Empire shows with stunning clarity how a divine conflict narrative can be perfectly retooled for a new age. They took the classic hero versus monster motif and stripped it of its pagan particulars, baptizing it into a robust Christian framework of angels, saints, and demons. Yet it served the exact same purpose as the myths of Marduk or Tahana. It explained adversity, legitimized political power, fostered incredible social cohesion, and provided a template for resilience that allowed their civilization to survive for a millennium against impossible odds. They looked out at a world crumbling into what they called the barbaric darkness and saw not a historical transition, but the latest campaign in a war that began before time itself, a war they were destined to fight until the end of days. Across the vast and varied landscapes of North America, from the arid deserts of the Southwest to the dense forests of the Northeast and the misty coastlines of the Pacific, Native American civilizations developed an understanding of cosmic conflict that was not written on clay tablets or carved into temple walls, but woven into the very fabric of their relationship with the living world. For these diverse cultures, the battle between order and chaos was not a remote event in a heavenly realm. It was a continuous, dynamic process happening within the environment itself, a delicate dance of balance where humanity played a crucial, participatory role. Their myths were not merely stories but complex, instructional narratives that mapped the ethical and practical responsibilities required to sustain life. Consider the Navajo or Dene people of the southwestern deserts. Their creation story is a profound journey through multiple worlds, each destroyed due to the inability of its inhabitants to live in harmony, until they emerged into the glittering world, the present fourth world. Central to this emergence is the figure of Changing Woman, a benevolent deity who embodies the cyclical, regenerative power of the earth itself. She is not a warrior who slays a monster in a single battle, but a life-giving force who constantly battles the entropic forces of stagnation and decay. Through her very nature. She grows old and becomes young again with the seasons. Her sons, the hero twins, are the ones who take up physical arms. They descend into the underworld to confront the myriad of monstrous beings that prey upon the people. These are not abstract demons. They are personifications of real, existential threats: poverty, hunger, old age, and fear. By defeating these monsters, the twins did not eliminate these forces from the world, but they learned how to manage and contain them, establishing the protocols for living a resilient life in a harsh landscape. This mythology directly informed the Navajo way of life, teaching that order is maintained not through final victory, but through continuous ritual practice, like the immensely complex Blessing Way ceremony, designed to restore Hajo beauty, balance, and harmony whenever it was disrupted. Far to the northeast, the Iroquois Confederacy, or Haudenosaunee, founded their League of Peace on a powerful cosmological drama centered on twin brothers. According to their tradition, the earth was created on the back of a great turtle, but it was a world still soft and unstable, inhabited by dangerous creatures. Into this world were born Sky Woman's twin grandsons, Sapling and Flint. Sapling was the right-handed twin, a creator who shaped the rivers to flow in two directions so people could travel easily, made the plants gentle and medicinal, and fashioned animals to be beneficial to humans. Flint, the left-handed twin, was his opposite, a stubborn and destructive force who twisted his brother's creations, making rivers run only one way, adding thorns to berries, and creating predators like the bear and the mountain lion. Their conflict was not a simple fight between good and evil. It was a necessary tension that shaped the world as we know it. The world is a blend of both their influences. The Iroquois understood that both mindsets are essential: the creative and the destructive, the gentle and the fierce. This myth provided a philosophical foundation for their sophisticated political system, which was designed to balance competing factions and viewpoints, understanding that true harmony emerges from the constructive management of opposition, not its elimination. On the opposite coast, the tribes of the Pacific Northwest, like the Tlingit and Haida, tell of a different kind of hero: Raven, the trickster transformer. In a world initially shrouded in darkness, Raven is the chaotic yet necessary force who steals the sun, moon, and stars from a selfish chief who had hoarded them in a sealed box. He releases them into the sky, bringing light to the world. Raven is not a noble warrior god. He is often greedy, mischievous, and self-serving. Yet through his chaotic actions, he ultimately brings order and culture to humanity. He is the one who discovers the first humans hidden inside a clamshell and coaxes them out to populate the world. This narrative presents a fascinating paradox. Order can sometimes be established through chaotic means. The monster to be overcome is not a beast but a state of being, the darkness and the selfish hoarding of resources. This story reflects the values of a culture built on immense natural abundance, where the central ethical concern was not scarcity, but the equitable and generous distribution of wealth, a value spectacularly enacted in the potlatch ceremony. These ceremonies were the engine of cosmic maintenance. The potlatch, practiced throughout the Pacific Northwest, was far more than a feast. It was a massive, ritualized redistribution of wealth, blankets, carved copper plates, canoes, food, that served to affirm social status, settle disputes, and most importantly, reinforce the community's balance. To give away wealth was to gain spiritual and social power. In a worldview where resources were seen as spiritual energy in physical form, hoarding created a dangerous spiritual blockage, a form of cosmic chaos. The potlatch was a ritualized battle against this chaos, ensuring the continuous flow of energy through the community, much like Raven ensured the flow of light into the world. Similarly, the sun dance of the Plains tribes was an act of profound sacrifice and renewal. Participants would dance for days, fasting and praying, often undergoing piercing rituals as an offering to the Great Spirit. This was not passive worship. It was an active, painful contribution of one's own life force to strengthen the cosmic order, to ensure the return of the buffalo herds, and to guarantee the continued rotation of the seasons, a direct participation in the eternal battle for balance. When European colonizers arrived, bringing with them catastrophic change, these deeply ingrained mythological frameworks became the primary lens through which native communities sought to comprehend the incomprehensible. The devastating waves of disease that wiped out up to 90% of some populations were not seen as random biological events. Through the Iroquois lens, it might have been interpreted as the left-handed twins' influence running rampant. For the Navajo, it was a terrible imbalance, a severe loss of Hojo on a massive scale, requiring unprecedented ceremonial response. The newcomers' technology, from firearms to metal tools, and their social structures based on private property and hierarchy, represented a terrifying new form of chaos. The colonizers' insistence on fencing off land and claiming individual ownership was a direct assault on the core principle of most native cosmologies, that the world is a shared relational space, not a commodity to be owned and exploited. Many prophets and leaders, from the Lenapes Neolin to the Shawnee leader Tenskwatawa, framed their resistance movements within this cosmological struggle. They preached a return to traditional ways, arguing that the adoption of European customs had angered the spirit world and allowed chaos to overtake the land. Their calls for cultural renewal were not just political strategy, they were a plea to rejoin the cosmic battle on the side of order, to perform the rituals and live the values that would restore balance to a world being violently torn apart. The breathtaking diversity of these traditions, from the agricultural Pueblo peoples to the nomadic buffalo hunters of the plains, demonstrates a universal truth. Each culture, in its own intimate dialogue with its specific environment, developed a unique expression of the same fundamental human need: to tell a story that places us within a cosmic drama, giving us a role, a responsibility, and a reason to strive for harmony in a world perpetually threatening to spiral into chaos. In the vast intellectual and spiritual tapestry of the Islamic world, the concept of jihad represents one of the most profound and often misunderstood engagements with the ancient theme of cosmic conflict. Far from a monolithic call to arms, classical Islamic theology meticulously delineated between the greater jihad and the lesser jihad, creating a comprehensive framework for understanding humanity's role in a universe where divine order is perpetually contested by chaotic forces. The Greater Jihad, or Al-Jihad al-Akbar, was identified by the Prophet Muhammad himself as the internal, spiritual struggle, the battle within the human soul against base desires, pride, and disbelief. This was the true, constant war, demanding rigorous self-discipline, moral purification, and unwavering faith. The Lesser Jihad, Al-Jihad al-Asghar, referred to the external, physical defense of the Muslim community and its values when they faced existential threat. This duality allowed for a nuanced approach where the spiritual battle was always paramount, and the physical one was strictly regulated by ethical codes concerning the protection of civilians, prisoners, and even the environment during conflict. This wasn't a mythology of gods battling sea serpents, but a sophisticated monotheistic system where every individual believer became a soldier on the front lines of an internal and external struggle to uphold truth and justice. The foundational stories that galvanized this world are deeply embedded in the Quranic narrative, which repeatedly emphasizes patient perseverance in the face of overwhelming opposition. The chronicles of earlier prophets, or Anbiya, serve as a powerful template. The prophet Noah endures centuries of ridicule to build his ark against the rising tide of disbelief. Abraham smashes the idols of his people and survives being thrown into a fiery furnace for his uncompromising monotheism. Moses confronts the tyrannical power of Pharaoh, armed with nothing but a staff and divine support. These are not tales of easy victory, but of profound struggle against seemingly insurmountable worldly power. For the early Muslim community in Mecca, these stories provided a vital mirror for their own experience. They were a persecuted minority facing social boycott, economic hardship, and physical torture for their beliefs. The Quranic revelation during this period comforted and fortified them, framing their suffering as part of a timeless prophetic pattern. Their steadfastness, or sabr, was itself an act of jihad, a spiritual resistance against the chaotic forces of persecution and polytheism. The subsequent migration to Medina and the eventual establishment of a society based on Islamic principles introduced the necessity of the lesser jihad, physically defending the community from those who sought to eradicate it. The life of Muhammad, therefore, embodied both struggles, the Meccan period emphasizing spiritual endurance and the Medinan period incorporating regulated physical defense, together creating a complete model for engaging with cosmic disorder. As Islamic civilization blossomed into a vast empire stretching from Spain to India, its philosophers and mystics dove deep into these concepts, extracting layers of meaning that addressed the human condition in its entirety. Sufism, Islamic mysticism, became the primary vessel for exploring the depths of the greater jihad. Sufi masters described the soul as a battlefield where the lower self, the nafs, with its animalistic desires and illusions, constantly rebelled against the higher self, the spirit, or Ra, which yearned for union with the divine. The spiritual path, or tariqa, was a methodical training to fight this inner war through remembrance of God, ascetic practices, and purifying the heart. The Sufi was a spiritual warrior whose conquest was over his own ego. Meanwhile, Islamic philosophers like Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina Avicenna interpreted the cosmic struggle through a Neo-Platonic lens. They envisioned a universe emanating from the Divine One, with the human intellect's role being to ascend back toward its source by battling the ignorance and material attachments that pulled it downward into the chaotic realm of multiplicity. In this philosophical framework, jihad became the intellectual and spiritual effort required to align oneself with the cosmic order of reason and truth, a journey from darkness into light. This remarkable adaptability was tested as Islamic rule expanded into culturally diverse regions, from the Zoroastrian legacy of Persia to the philosophical heritage of Greece and the Hindu traditions of India. Islamic scholars proved adept at integrating new ideas while preserving the core principles of their faith. The concept of jihad was central to defining the boundaries and responsibilities of this expanding civilization. The protected status of Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians as people of the book within Islamic societies, while imperfectly applied at times, stemmed from a legal framework developed during the early conquests, a framework that saw military jihad as a means to establish a space where divine order could prevail, not to force individual conversion. In later centuries, when the Islamic world faced its own periods of internal fracture and external threat, the concept of jihad was continually revisited and reinterpreted. During the Crusades, it was emphasized as a unifying call to defend Muslim lands from foreign invasion. In the face of the Mongol onslaught that destroyed the Abbasid Caliphate, theologians wrestled with the theological crisis, some arguing that the Mongols' eventual conversion to Islam was a form of divine victory that transformed the nature of the struggle. Later still, mystics and reformers in West Africa and Southeast Asia would employ the language of jihad not just against external colonial powers, but against internal social injustices and syncretic practices they believed corrupted pure worship. Throughout these tumultuous shifts, the core duality of the struggle remained: the eternal, greater battle within the soul and the contingent, regulated battle in the world, both dedicated to the same ultimate goal, submitting to the divine order that alone can triumph over the chaos of human ego and injustice. High on the wind-swept plateau of the Himalayas, a spiritual tradition emerged that would take the ancient theme of divine conflict and turn it inward, transforming the battlefield from the external cosmos to the very landscape of the human mind. Tibetan Buddhism did not arrive in a vacuum. It encountered a land already teeming with powerful spirits and ancient gods from the indigenous Bon religion, a shamanistic tradition that saw the mountains, lakes, and skies as alive with conscious, often capricious forces. The resulting synthesis was not a conquest but a brilliant act of spiritual diplomacy, creating a unique mythology where the demons were not slain but converted, and the ultimate victory was not over external monsters, but over the inner demons of ego, attachment, and aversion. This was a cosmic struggle reimagined as a path of profound psychological integration. The master of this spiritual negotiation was the 8th century Indian tantric master, Padmasambhava, known to Tibetans as Guru Rinpoche, the Precious Master. His legendary journey to Tibet is recounted in texts as a dramatic campaign of cosmic pacification. The Tibetan landscape was believed to be held in the thrall of powerful local deities and demons who resisted the new Buddhist teachings, causing natural disasters and obstructing the construction of the first monastery, Samai. Padmasambhava did not come as a destroyer. Instead, he engaged these forces directly in epic magical duels. Through his superior spiritual power and mastery of tantric rituals, he did not annihilate them. He subdued them, binding them under oath to become protectors of the Dharma. The fierce, fanged deities that populate the Tibetan pantheon, like Palden Lamo and Mahakala, are not enemies of Buddhism but its sworn guardians. They are the former demons of the old order, their chaotic energy not eliminated but harnessed and redirected toward the protection of wisdom and compassion. This narrative established a core Tibetan Buddhist principle that the raw energy of chaos and negativity is not something to be rejected, but a potent force that can be transformed into fuel for enlightenment. This inner and outer drama is vividly illustrated in one of the world's most breathtaking religious art forms, the Thangka painting. These intricate scrolls are far more than decorative objects. They are intricate maps of the psyche and the cosmos. A single Thangka might depict a serene, compassionate Buddha figure at its center, surrounded by a swirling mandala of deities, bodhisattvas, and most strikingly, a retinue of wrathful, terrifying figures dancing amidst flames and wearing garlands of severed heads. To the uninitiated, this seems like a scene of pure violence, but in the Tibetan view, this is a snapshot of the ongoing cosmic psychological battle. The wrathful deities are not external monsters but personifications of the powerful methods needed to dismantle the inner obstacles to enlightenment. The flames represent the transformative fire of wisdom that burns away ignorance. The severed heads symbolize the decapitation of the ego and its myriad of selfish attachments. These images serve a dual purpose. They are objects of meditation, providing a visual focus for confronting one's own inner demons, and they are a form of spiritual armor, preparing the practitioner to face the terrifying aspects of reality and the mind without flinching. This leads to the most revolutionary aspect of the Tibetan approach to conflict, the practice of churd, which literally means to cut off. Developed by the renowned yogini Machig Labdrön, this is not a practice of destroying demons with a sword, but of inviting them to a feast. In a churd ritual, a practitioner will often go to a charnel ground or other frightening place at night, and through visualization and ritual, summon all the gods, demons, and internal fears that haunt them. Then they perform the ultimate act of compassion and fearlessness. they offer their own body as a feast to these entities, by willingly offering what the ego clings to most fiercely, the physical form. The practitioner severs the root of attachment and fear. The demon of hunger is satisfied, the demon of fear is faced, and the demon of self-grasping is utterly transformed. The monster is not an enemy to be vanquished, but a misunderstood force of energy that, when approached with fearless compassion, reveals its true nature as wisdom. This is the culmination of the Tibetan synthesis. The cosmic battle is resolved not through victory of one side over the other, but through the radical realization that there never were two sides to begin with. This profound and resilient world was brutally tested in the mid-20th century when the People's Liberation Army of China invaded and annexed Tibet. For the Tibetan people, this was not merely a political or military catastrophe. It was a manifestation of the cosmic struggle on a historical scale. Buddhist leaders and ordinary citizens alike interpreted these events through their deeply ingrained mythological framework. The Chinese Communist forces, with their militant atheism and systematic destruction of monasteries, relics, and texts, were seen not just as soldiers but as a modern embodiment of the Mara, the demonic forces of distraction and destruction that had assailed the Buddha himself under the Bodhi tree. The immense suffering, the torture of monks, and the forced exile of their spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama, were framed as a collective karma and a test of faith on an unimaginable scale. In response, they did not primarily take up physical arms. They intensified their spiritual practice. Prayers for the compassion of the Chinese aggressors, meditation on patience, and the clandestine preservation of their teachings became acts of resistance. This was the lesser jihad internalized. The Gigantomachy fought with mantras and meditation cushions. By framing their oppression as part of the timeless dance between wisdom and ignorance, they found a way to endure the unendurable without surrendering their identity, proving that the most powerful weapon in a cosmic conflict can sometimes be the unwavering refusal to see your opponent as a monster. And so we arrive at our own time, at a civilization that prides itself on logic and evidence, that has traded the temple for the laboratory and the myth for the peer-reviewed paper. Yet, even in our hyper-rational, technologically driven age, the human mind has not abandoned its deep-seated need for the cosmic struggle narrative. It has simply recast the characters and translated the script into a new language, the language of science. We may have retired the gods and the dragons, but we have replaced them with forces just as vast and impersonal, engaging in conflicts every bit as epic and consequential. The stage is now the entire cosmos, and the battle is between fundamental laws of physics, a drama we decipher not through prophecy, but through mathematics and the patient collection of data. Consider the grandest story modern science tells, the history of the universe itself. It begins not with a deity speaking light into being, but with a singularity, a point of infinite density and heat, a state of pure, undifferentiated chaos. Then the Big Bang, a cosmic eruption that is our modern equivalent of Marduk's first blow against Tiamat. From that initial, unimaginable explosion, the fundamental forces of nature themselves began their own eternal struggle. Gravity, the great attractor, pulls matter together, seeking to collapse it back into itself. The electromagnetic force and the nuclear forces push back, building structure and complexity. This is the ultimate cosmic conflict, a tug-of-war that has been raging for 13.8 billion years. A battle that determined whether the universe would immediately collapse, fly apart into a thin, cold mist, or as in our fortunate case, find a precarious balance that allowed for the formation of galaxies, stars, and planets. Our very existence is the product of this primordial stalemate between opposing physical powers. On our own planet, the theory of evolution by natural selection presents a different kind of relentless war. Here, the monsters are not serpents or giants. but extinction events, the asteroid that struck 66 million years ago, wiping out the dinosaurs, or the great oxygenation event that poisoned the ancient atmosphere for countless early life forms. The gods are not benevolent deities but blind, algorithmic processes, mutation which introduces random change, and selection, which ruthlessly tests every new form against the harsh realities of the environment. This is a drama without a script or a director, a perpetual struggle for survival where the only prize is the chance to pass one's genes into the next generation. The terrifying, dragon-like creatures of the past did exist. The T-Rex was every bit the monster of legend, and they were indeed laid low by a cosmic fire from the sky, a narrative that science has proven to be true, just without the conscious intent of a divine archer. Even our understanding of the human mind has been shaped by this narrative framework. The pioneering psychologist Carl Jung argued that these ancient myths of gods and monsters were not outdated superstitions, but expressions of universal, innate psychological patterns he called archetypes. The hero's battle against the dragon is not just a story, it is a metaphor for the individual's struggle for consciousness, for the ego's difficult and dangerous task of confronting the chaotic, unknown depths of the unconscious mind. The monster from the abyss is the shadow self, the repressed fears and desires that threaten to overwhelm our orderly sense of identity. Slaying the dragon is not about destruction, but about integration, mastering these chaotic inner forces to achieve a more whole and complete self. In this way, Jung recast the entire cosmic battle as an internal, psychological process, arguing that every human life is a hero's journey through a landscape of inner demons and divine inspirations. This ancient need for the story did not vanish with the advent of science. It simply found new outlets in our modern culture. The breathtaking popularity of fantasy epics like The Lord of the Rings and A Song of Ice and Fire, or cinematic universes like Star Wars and the Marvel franchise, proves that the archetypal narrative is as potent as ever. Darth Vader is our modern Surtur, a fallen knight shrouded in darkness threatening the galaxy. The White Walkers are our Fomorians, an ancient, icy evil returning from beyond the wall to end the world of men. These stories resonate so deeply not because we believe in magic or lightsabers, but because they are built upon the same timeless scaffold of order battling chaos, good confronting overwhelming evil, and the small, seemingly insignificant individual discovering they have a crucial role to play in the fate of everything. Our video games allow us to actively participate in these myths, to become the hero who wields the legendary sword against the embossed dragon, providing an interactive ritual space where we can safely experience and practice the age-old struggle. Ultimately, the scientific paradigm and mythological thinking are not the opposites they appear to be. They are two different languages describing the same human experience of a vast, often frightening and awe-inspiring universe. Science gives us the mechanics of the Big Bang, while myth gives us the emotional and narrative weight of creation. Biology details the algorithm of natural selection, while ancient stories embody the visceral struggle for survival. Psychology maps the neural pathways of fear, while legends give us the dragon to represent what we are afraid of. Our ancestors looked at a volcano and saw the forge of an angry god. We look at it and see tectonic plate subduction. But both responses are attempts to make sense of a powerful, chaotic force. The scientific adaptation of these ancient concepts demonstrates that mythological thinking is a fundamental, hardwired part of being human. It evolves, it incorporates new evidence, but it never disappears. It is the timeless framework we use to answer the most profound questions. Where did we come from? What are we fighting against? And what is our small part to play in this grand, beautiful, and terrifying cosmic story? For centuries, these epic narratives of gods clashing with monsters were dismissed as pure fantasy. the vivid imaginings of pre-scientific cultures trying to explain a confusing world. But what if we've been reading them wrong all along? What if these stories are not just metaphors, but are actually a unique form of history, a deeply encoded mythological memory of real, catastrophic events that nearly wiped our ancestors from the earth? Modern archaeology is now pulling back the curtain on this tantalizing possibility, revealing a startling convergence between ancient myth and hard evidence dug from the ground, suggesting that the line between legend and historical truth is far blurrier than we ever imagined. Consider the case of the Minoans, whose bull monsters and labyrinthine palaces we explored earlier. For a long time, the legend of Atlantis, described by Plato as a sophisticated island kingdom that sank into the sea in a single day and night, was considered a philosophical fable. Then archaeologists began piecing together the fate of the Minoans. We now know that around the year 1600 BCE, the volcanic island of Thera, just 70 miles north of Crete, exploded in a cataclysm so immense it makes the eruption of Mount St. Helens look like a firecracker. This was one of the largest volcanic events in human history. The explosion would have been heard across the Mediterranean. It generated tsunamis hundreds of feet high that would have smashed into the northern coast of Crete, devastating the Minoan fleet and coastal settlements. The sky would have darkened for weeks under a blanket of ash that suffocated crops and blotted out the sun. The entire Minoan civilization, a powerhouse of the ancient world, was critically weakened, left vulnerable to conquest and collapse. The parallels are too striking to ignore: a sophisticated island civilization, a catastrophic geological event that destroys it in a terrifyingly short time. The story of Atlantis suddenly sounds less like a fiction and more like a distorted, millennia-old memory of a very real disaster that shattered the Minoan world, a story that was passed down and transformed over generations into a tale of a god-punished city sinking beneath the waves. This pattern of geological trauma echoing in myth repeats itself across the globe. Another compelling theory revolves around a great flood. Cultures from the Mesopotamians with the epic of Gilgamesh to the Hebrews with the story of Noah share a strikingly similar narrative of a world-destroying deluge. For years, these were seen as separate, symbolic stories. Then, in the 1990s, two marine geologists, William Ryan and Walter Pittman, put forth a dramatic hypothesis. They proposed that around 5600 BCE, as the last ice age ended and global sea levels rose, the Mediterranean Sea catastrophically broke through the natural land bridge at the Bosporus. They argued that a massive wall of saltwater poured into what was then a much smaller, freshwater Black Sea lake, inundating over 60,000 square miles of settled land in a matter of months. The shorelines would have advanced by a mile a day, forcing a mass, desperate exodus of Neolithic farmers. This event would have been seared into the collective memory of the survivors, a story carried by their dispersing descendants in all directions. This single, traumatic historical event could be the primordial seed from which all the great flood myths of the ancient Near East grew. A real-world catastrophe so profound it became a cornerstone of cultural memory for an entire region. The evidence extends beyond floods and volcanoes. Take, for instance, the curious case of a city called Tall El Hammam in the Jordan Valley. Archaeologists working at this Bronze Age site found a layer of destruction unlike any other. The mud-brick walls of the city had literally been vitrified turned to glass, and pottery fragments were melted on one side only, suggesting an intense, sudden, and incredibly hot heat blast from above. They also found diamond-like crystals and melted metals that required temperatures higher than any ancient furnace or weapon could produce. The scientific team investigating the site published a controversial but fascinating theory in 2021 that the city was destroyed by the airburst of a small asteroid or comet, similar to but much larger than the 1908 Tunguska event in Siberia. What makes this discovery truly breathtaking is its location and timing. The site is in the right place and from the right time period to be the biblical city of Sodom. The description of its destruction in the book of Genesis is apocalyptic. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. The account describes a fire from the sky that obliterated the cities and smoked like a furnace. The archaeological evidence from Tall El Hammam suggests that the myth of Sodom and Gomorrah may preserve the memory of a real, terrifying cosmic impact that annihilated a city, an event so inexplicable and violent that it could only be understood as an act of divine wrath. This intersection of myth and physical evidence is revolutionizing our understanding of ancient societies. We are beginning to see that their stories were not just fanciful explanations for the unknown, but were often sophisticated attempts to process and record genuine, earth-shattering trauma. The discovery of mass graves from periods of sudden collapse, the unearthing of fortified cities with hastily built walls, and ritual caches of valuable objects buried in times of panic all paint a picture of civilizations repeatedly facing existential threats. Paleoclimatology, the study of ancient climates, now shows us periods of severe, multi-generational drought that correspond perfectly with times of famine, war, and societal breakdown described in myth and historical record. Archaeoastronomy has revealed that ancient monuments like Stonehenge or the Sun Dagger at Choco Canyon were precisely aligned to track celestial cycles, proving that our ancestors were meticulous observers of the skies. They were watching for omens, for patterns, for any sign that the cosmic balance was shifting. When a comet streaked across the sky, when the sun was blotted out by volcanic ash, or when the rains failed for a decade, they didn't have scientific journals to explain it. They had a mythological framework. These events became the dragons and serpents threatening the sun god, the anger of the storm deity, the triumph of chaotic forces over order. The stories were their science, their history, and their therapy, all woven into one. They were a way to make meaning from the meaningless chaos of natural disaster, to transform paralyzing terror into a narrative where humans could still play a role, even if only through prayer and ritual, in helping the gods restore balance to a shattered world. Why have these ancient stories of divine warfare resonated so deeply across thousands of years and hundreds of cultures? The answer may lie not in the heavens, but within the very wiring of the human mind. These narratives of gods battling monsters are far more than entertainment or primitive science. They are sophisticated psychological tools that our ancestors developed to navigate a terrifying and unpredictable world. At their core, they perform a fundamental function. They transform meaningless suffering into meaningful struggle. Imagine the profound terror of an ancient farmer watching a solar eclipse. The sun, the source of all life, is being swallowed by a terrifying darkness. Without an explanatory framework, this event is pure, random horror, a descent into existential dread. But within a mythological system, this same event becomes a recognizable chapter in a familiar story. It is the serpent Apophis momentarily gaining the upper hand in its daily battle with Ra, or the wolf skull chasing the sun across the Norse sky. The event is no longer random, it is part of a pattern. It has a name, a history, and most importantly, a projected outcome. The god has triumphed before, and he will triumph again. This narrative framing is a powerful antidote to anxiety, replacing paralyzing fear with a story that promises the sun will return. This process of meaning-making is amplified tremendously through ritual. When a community collectively reenacts a divine victory, such as the Hittites performing the Purulai festival to commemorate Tahana's defeat of the dragon Illuyanka, they are not merely putting on a play. They are participating in a form of psychological catharsis and communal reinforcement. The ritual is a shared, symbolic action where everyone has a role in assisting the gods, from the king who plays the part of the deity to the commoner who shouts encouragement from the crowd. This collective participation forges powerful social bonds, creating a sense of shared identity and purpose. It reinforces the idea that we are in this together, and that by upholding our ritual duties, we are active participants in maintaining cosmic order. This is incredibly empowering for a community facing real-world threats like famine, disease, or invasion. It transforms them from helpless victims of chaos into a united front, soldiers in a cosmic army fighting on the side of light. The ritual provides a predictable script for dealing with the unpredictable, a way to channel collective fear into focused, purposeful action that reinforces social cohesion. Modern psychology provides a robust framework for understanding why these ancient mechanisms are so effective. Research on narrative psychology confirms that humans are fundamentally storytelling creatures. We understand our lives and our suffering through the narratives we construct. A difficult event processed as a random, meaningless tragedy can lead to despair and helplessness. That same event, framed as a challenging chapter in a larger heroic journey, a dark night of the soul, before a hard-won victory fosters resilience and post-traumatic growth. The divine conflict myth is the ultimate template for this. It provides a pre-made, culturally sanctioned narrative arc of struggle, sacrifice, and ultimate triumph that individuals can map onto their personal hardships. Furthermore, the work of Carl Jung suggests these stories tap into universal, innate psychological patterns he called archetypes. The god represents the conscious ego or the higher self, while the monster embodies the shadow, the unknown, chaotic, and terrifying aspects of the unconscious mind. The battle is an externalized drama of the internal struggle for individuation, the process of integrating our own darker aspects to achieve psychological wholeness. We are all, on some level, fighting our own personal dragons. This explains the enduring power of these myths in our seemingly secular modern world. They have not disappeared, they have simply migrated. We see the same archetypal patterns erupting in our dreams, where we might flee from shadowy pursuers or confront terrifying beasts. Our psyche's way of processing daily anxieties through ancient symbolic language. Our most popular cultural products are direct descendants of these stories. The entire fantasy genre, from The Lord of the Rings to Game of Thrones, is built upon the foundation of a clearly defined force of order battling a monstrous, chaotic enemy. Star Wars is perhaps the most explicit modern myth, complete with a cosmic force, a dark side, a heroic journey, and a saber-wielding knight who must confront the shadow within his own lineage. Even superhero films are a pure expression of this archetype, with super-powered beings standing in for gods who battle villains who are modern embodiments of chaos. We are still telling the same stories because we still face the same fundamental human struggles. We may not fear a literal sea serpent, but we grapple with the monstrous scale of climate change, global pandemics, and economic instability. These are our modern chaos monsters, vast, impersonal, and terrifying forces that threaten our societal order. The psychological purpose of the myth remains unchanged, to provide a framework that allows us to face down the terrifying abyss, not with the certainty of victory, but with the courage that comes from knowing we are part of an eternal, shared story of resistance against the dark. Our journey through 26 civilizations has revealed how the recurring theme of gods waging war against monsters represents a profound human attempt to understand and navigate a world filled with forces beyond our control. From the Sumerians to modern scientists, humans have used these narratives to make meaning from natural disasters, social conflicts, and personal struggles. These stories provided frameworks for resilience, community cohesion, and adaptive response to challenges across millennia. The forgotten civilizations caught in these cosmic crossfires developed sophisticated cultural systems that integrated mythological understanding with practical survival strategies. As we face contemporary global challenges, these ancient narratives remind us of the human capacity to find meaning and maintain hope even in the most difficult circumstances. The enduring power of these stories lies in their ability to help us see our struggles as part of a larger cosmic drama, connecting us to countless generations who also sought to bring order from chaos and light from darkness. What unites the Sumerian priest chanting the Enuma Elish, the Norse skald singing of Ragnarök, and the modern physicist detailing the Big Bang is a fundamental human need to place ourselves within a story larger than our individual lives. These narratives are not mere fictions or primitive attempts at science. They are the foundational frameworks upon which civilizations built their identity, their morality, and their will to persevere. They answered the most terrifying question our ancestors faced when disaster struck. Why? Why is the world so unpredictable and often cruel? The answer, encoded in the epic of a storm god fighting a serpent or a culture hero stealing fire from the gods, was that existence itself is a struggle between order and chaos, and that humanity has a sacred role to play in that eternal conflict. This was not a call to despair, but a call to action. It gave people a part to play, a way to contribute through ritual, through courage, and through community, transforming passive victims of circumstance into active participants in a cosmic drama. This shared mythological heritage reveals a stunning commonality across all human experience. A farmer in ancient Egypt watching the Nile fail to flood, and a programmer in Silicon Valley today grappling with the chaotic potential of artificial intelligence are, on a psychological level, facing the same primordial fear. The fear of forces so vast and impersonal they threaten to undo the world they know. The Egyptian looked to the story of Ra and Apophis, finding solace in the ritual that could help the sun god win his nightly battle. We look to scientific models and ethical frameworks, seeking to build guardrails against potential chaos. The tools have changed, but the underlying impulse is identical. We are still telling stories about containing monsters because the monsters have simply taken new forms. Climate change, global pandemics, the destabilizing power of disruptive technologies, these are our Leviathans and our Jörmungandrs, our modern embodiments of existential chaos. And just like our ancestors, we are crafting new narratives to understand them, from dystopian science fiction to hopeful documentaries, trying to find our own place in a new kind of cosmic story. The true lesson from these 26 civilizations is not about the monsters themselves, but about the incredible adaptability and resilience of the human spirit. Faced with the volcano, the flood, or the famine, they did not simply give up. They told a story. They painted the monster on a temple wall. They composed a hymn about its defeat. They forged a hero's weapon from bronze and belief. They used narrative as a technology for survival, a psychological tool to process collective trauma, and build a shared identity that could withstand the worst the world could throw at them. Their stories were their shields. This creative resilience is their greatest legacy to us. It reminds us that in the face of our own overwhelming challenges, our first and most powerful resource is our ability to find meaning, to connect with others, and to weave a narrative of hope and purpose. We honor their memory not by believing their literal stories, but by embracing their courageous spirit of meaning-making. As our own world grows more complex and interconnected, the ancient boundary between order and chaos feels more relevant than ever. The cosmic crossfire now happens on our news feeds and in our global networks, but the fundamental human experience remains the same. We are still those people looking at the sky and wondering, trying to find our footing in a universe that is both beautiful and terrifying. The enduring power of these ancient myths lies in this profound connection. They assure us that our anxiety, our hope, and our relentless drive to create order are not modern inventions, but are woven into the very fabric of what it means to be human. They are a whisper across the centuries, a reminder that we are part of an unbroken chain of storytellers, all gazing into the darkness, all striving to summon just enough